I just started it, in fact.
I'm trying to figure out the best spot to set up.
Okay. Jack White, I feel you.
It's all right. I think we've done worse.
Yes. 5 years.
Austin, I'm here if you need to test anything. This is Jill.
Yeah.
I'm gonna squeeze by you.
You're good, you're good. No, HR, please. I have
We're good. The sound was on. I'll just let him know that.
She asked me how to do it, and I said call meeting order. I didn't introduce her. Just basically talk about this. Having last meeting.
Yeah, forget it.
Unless you have anything else.
No.
I'm cool.
Good, thank you. No problem.
Because I grabbed it in a hurry last night. Through and
See if we can pull from. Maybe. Yeah.
That'll just that.
Try and. Gotta go always in pockets. Yes.
See, but it's like we should be good, so just in Jesus.
So.
That's for my favorite when, thank you, Logan.
I think that feels substantial. Efficiently, legally.
As best as possible, right?
And it's noting there, continue environment, mini story, continue.
What's up, Mike? But seriously.
I think they got it turned off over at the sound.
Here's any.
I did sure I did.
I think I'm a phone.
Oh.
I was gonna grab you, but you're so busy. I did. Oh, yeah, yeah. You are recognized.
Yeah.
Well,
Do you want? Where they are? Oh, you should. Live.
Right, come on. Right, right. Now. Good job. Both sides. Maps. Yeah, set. Shipments of play.
worried.
Sorry, and all I knew.
I'll just say.
Yeah, yours. Shannon, yes, ma'am. I have to ask you a question, just because I think it might. Congratulations. Even if you're the.
What's he
Like, let's say the person. Subdivisions. But they look at the map and go, oh, that's good, oh, that's under my street. Oh my gosh, this is a steep. It's that. And I have like. Yeah, no. Last one. Sometimes the school district. Let's hope y'all don't send me off. That's all I want to say. That's what it's. How can I find out? He's gonna do this. That's all I showed you. How to find all.
Good. Thank you.
So basically.
All right, are we good, Austin? We're good? Okay. All right, welcome to the April special call meeting of the Greenville City Planning Commission for the Greenville Development Code and Zoning Map. This is a meeting continuance of the March 30th public hearing. My name is Meg Terry. I serve as the chairperson of the commission. I'm an architect and live in the North Main neighborhood of Greenville. At this time, I'll invite the rest of the members in attendance to introduce themselves. Derek, you want to start us off?
My name is Derek Kinderlin. I'm an attorney. I live in the Colonel Rice Earl Historic District.
Hello, I'm Mike Martinez. I'm an architect and I live in the North Main neighborhood.
I'm Diane Eldridge. I live in the Parkins Mill area. I'm retired with a background in planning and conservation.
Jeff Randolph, live in the West End Real Estate Developer.
I'm Pamela Adams, live in the Augusta Road area, and I'm a property management.
I'm Lynn Soulsby. I'm a civil engineer and live in the Augusta Road area.
We're all volunteers appointed by City Council to serve on this board. The responsibilities of the Planning Commission include preparing the comprehensive plan, conducting public hearings, and making recommendations to City Council on amendments to the zoning ordinance and map. Planning Commission also takes action on preliminary subdivision plats, plans for multifamily development, and final development plans. If you haven't already picked up an agenda for today's meeting, I believe there are copies at the entrance. This meeting is a continuance of the public hearing from March the 30th. The commission received the full staff report and conducted the public portion of the hearing at the March 30th session. Following the procedure in our bylaws, today's session will begin with a rebuttal, an opportunity for the applicant, which is the city, to respond to some of the public comments we heard last time and which we've continued to receive in writing. I understand staff may have a few additional modifications for the Planning Commission to consider, which we look forward to receiving. The Planning Commission will begin its discussion and deliberations on the code. The Commission may render a decision at this meeting, continue the public hearing to a date certain, or consider a deferral to a future meeting. If this is necessary, we will share the time and location of that meeting before we leave today. Thank you all for coming. Please make sure your phones are silenced, and we will move forward with roll call.
Diane Eldridge,
Here.
Mike Martinez,
Here.
Lynn Soulsby,
Here.
Jeff Randolph,
Here.
Derek Kinderlin,
Here.
Pam Adams,
Here.
and Meg Terry.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Great. With that, I will turn it over to staff to give us any additions to the public hearing.
Good evening, Planning Commission and members of our community. Thank you all so much for being here tonight and allowing us to have some opportunity to go through the responses that we received after the public hearing. The point of our meeting tonight is to have an opportunity to listen to you all's comments related to both staff's recommendations for changes and from the public hearing, with the anticipation that we would defer after tonight and ask for a second public hearing based on the changes that we've received and from you all. That is kind of our plan for this evening. Obviously, it's up to the commission as to how you want to move forward, but that would be staff's recommendation. Okay, so as you'll recall, we delivered our former staff report and presentation on the new development code and zoning map at the first part of the public hearing on March 30th. Planning Commission also received numerous comments in writing and at the public comment portion of that meeting. Staff has continued to receive written comments since March 30th, all of which have been shared with the commission, and anything received today has been printed and placed at your dais. The commission's bylaws allow the applicant, in this case the city, an opportunity for rebuttal, which is what we're providing at this time. We would like to use this time to respond to some of the comments and concerns presented at the last meeting, expressed in writing, or which have been shared online and within the community. Staff also has several additional changes we would like to submit to the commission as part of staff's formal recommendation, as we believe these changes go a long way towards addressing some of the concerns of the community. After the applicant's rebuttal, we will turn it back over to the commission for questions and deliberation. So let's get started on our recommendations. Next slide, please. First, we will look at the changes staff is recommending in addition to those listed in the staff report dated March 24th and posted on the city's website. To help keep track of the changes, this slideshow distinguishes between the modifications presented on March 30th and the ones we're presenting today. On the screen, this change to the RHB standards will reduce the height of accessory structures. The change was requested as part of the conversation on accessory dwelling units. As mentioned last time, staff does not believe that this would apply to RHA, but would instead apply to RHB, RHC, and RHD. The reason for not applying to RHA or the larger lots and increased setbacks would allow for the accessory structure to be taller. And as you can see, we were originally at 25 feet and we've asked to go down to a 20-foot height max and a 16-foot sidewall height. And that would be for RHB, RHC, and RHD. Next slide. Here are the additional changes staff is submitting in the zoning request. First, we would like to simplify how changes or churches and religious assemblies are treated in the table of uses. The proposed change would remove the 10,000 square foot distinction and remove the special exception requirement. This supports the goal of making the code by right and helps to ensure compliance with a federal law called the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act. This act was passed in the year 2000 and limits the degree of land use regulations that a local government can impose on churches. Removing the special exception helps make our new code compliant with the federal law, and it'll be a part of zoning changes that we're going to recommend later in the staff report. The next change to section 3.3.4 clarifies that alcohol sales are allowed at restaurants. This is not a substantive change, but rather clarifying language. Staff received inquiries from business owners worried that general food and beverage restaurants could not sell alcohol. That is not correct, and this language simply clarifies that point. As a note, the code controls for when the volume of alcohol sales make it a bar or nightclub. The change shown here does not affect those standards in any way. And so a restaurant serving alcohol where their primary gross receipts have to be more than 51% of food and not beverage in order to be classified as a restaurant. If their gross receipts are classified at 51% or more of alcohol, we would consider that a bar or nightclub. So that is the distinction. But we do have many restaurants that do serve alcohol, and we're concerned that they would not be able to serve alcohol under the new code. The third row on the screen, staff would like to formally request adding an owner occupancy requirement for ADUs. We've heard this a lot from the community, and I really want to thank the community for sharing their concerns about ADUs. And this seems to be an area of compromise on the ADUs about the owner occupancy requirement. This change is supported by neighborhood residents that have concerns with ADUs. I'm not saying that they support the ADUs, but they were supportive of adding this in as a consideration. If accessory units are going to be in the code, they would like to see an owner occupancy requirement. With this addition, one of the dwelling units, either the primary or the ADU, must be occupied by the property owner. Both units could not be leased. The idea is that the property owner would help ensure the proper upkeep and maintenance of the property and preserve the stability of the city's neighborhoods. And we did vet this through Brian Brown and our partners at the Greenville Housing Fund. Last is a more technical change that provides the ability for a house to exceed the district width maximum if it's set back from the front building plane. This change is recommended by staff after working through building plans with many homeowners. Staff believes the allowance still preserves the form standards for residential districts and will not negatively impact the character of existing neighborhoods. I will add that this type of change is something we will probably see more of at the 6 and 12-month review periods as we begin working with the code and identifying those small technical issues and work needed to fine-tune the code for Greenville. We just happen to identify this one now and are putting it forward for a text change. Okay, next slide. So map changes. Let's recap the 4 zoning map changes that staff presented at the March 30th meeting. First, 215 West Earl Street should go to RHC. So you can say it got missed in the zoning classifications. This was requested with strong support of the neighborhood. Next, 13 Sycamore has a current split zone, and we propose to follow the existing split zone line, like to like. You'll hear that several times in this presentation today. This would help facilitate future commercial development on Lawrence Road while limiting the impacts to the residential neighborhood to the rear. This change was requested by the property owner and is supported by staff. Next, at 8 Sycamore Drive, across the street from the last property, is a commercial lot where MX2 zoning is appropriate. Next, the last of the March 30th map changes, the parcel at 110 Dime Street in Nicholtown. Staff understands that this was previously used for small commercial use. The neighborhood is supportive of a duplex or triplex if the structure were renovated. Staff therefore recommends an RNA zoning classification. Okay, so now we're going to move into additional modifications. The next set of slides propose changes to several church properties located throughout the city. Since March 30th, staff has received comments and concerns over the proposed zoning for several churches and places of worship on the new zoning map. As you will see, most of these currently have a residential zoning under the land management ordinance, either single family or multifamily, but they may have been upzoned on the new map to districts that allow more density or commercial uses. These changes were inadvertent and occurred during the conversion process of assigning parcel zoning classifications under the new code. The community has expressed a desire for these parcels to go through an individual rezoning process in the event any of them were ever proposed for redevelopment in the future. Staff agrees, and we appreciate the community for this feedback and for voicing their concern. They have been heard, and that's why we are making these proposed changes today. We are therefore submitting recommendation on these parcels to receive zoning designations as close as possible to their existing zoning today. We have included the current element of zoning on these slides for reference. First are 3 church sites on Cleveland Street: St. Matthew UMC, Greenville ARP Church, and First Baptist. Their existing zoning is RM2, which is residential, multifamily, allows 20 units per acre, and they were initially assigned an RC, residential commercial, 2 zoning designation. RC2 would allow for more density and some commercial use that is over and above the RM2. Instead, we are proposing an RNC designation, which allows a maximum of 16 dwelling units per lot, which is less than under the current LMO. The maximum building height is 3 stories, and so that is why we selected RNC for these church sites. It also does not allow for commercial uses. There is 1 single-family residential lot up in the top left of this image on Partridge Lane, northeast of St. Matthews. This may have been owned by the church at some point, but is not today. It is a single-family home. The parcel should go to RHB, consistent with the adjacent residential parcels on Partridge Lane. We've indicated this parcel on the screen. Okay, next slide. Augusta Road Baptist Church. Today, the zoning is split between C2 and R9. You can see that in the map to the right. The orange is C2 and the yellow is R9. The draft map proposed giving all of the parcels owned by the church an MX2, but this would have brought commercial development further into the neighborhood than desired. Staff recommends keeping the MX2 along Augusta Street and changing the areas back on Jones Avenue to RHB. This would duplicate the existing split that exists today, as you can see on the zoning map. So again, for this one, we would be keeping MX2 along Augusta Street, which is equivalent to the C2, and going to R9 or RHC, which is equivalent to the R9 for the parcels along Jones Street, just like they are today. This is the property for Westminster Presbyterian Church. We initially proposed an RNXC zoning, but with the goal of keeping the new zoning consistent with what exists today, these properties would go to RHC, which is consistent with the surrounding neighborhood and with the current LMO zoning of R6. And let me just pause here for a moment to explain a little bit what is an R6 and what is an R9. An R6 is a single-family zoning classification that allows 6,000 square feet lots minimum. An R9 is a single-family zoning classification that allows 9,000 square foot lots minimum. Our RHC is also our house scale district in our new code, which is the equivalent to our R6 and requires a minimum of 6,000 square foot lots. And RHB is in our house scale code, which is equivalent to the R9 with 9,000 square foot lots. So everybody can kind of keep up with these R6 to RHC, R9 to RHB. We did add 2 additional zoning classifications for our single family house scale districts. We added an RHD for our smaller single family lots that we have in the community, which are a minimum of 3,000 square feet. And then we also added an RHA for our larger single family classifications that you find in the community. We do have a lot of lots, especially in Gower, that are almost 3/4 of an acre, and that would be a minimum of 18,000 square foot lots. Okay, back to the church. One parcel that is owned by the church is actually C2. And you can see that in the map on the right. You see all the yellow, which is R6. You see that little bit of orange, which is C2. That one parcel and its next to Gantt uniform would go to MX2, again, equivalent to C2, and the Augusta Commons Shopping Center next door. So that's what those are all zoned. So we would keep that consistent with the MX2. Everything else would revert to the RHC, which is the single family zoning, to match the R6 that it currently is today. St. Michael's Lutheran Church. Today, this property is zoned R6. The larger lot sizes north of Augusta Street prompted an RHB zoning classification with minimum lot sizes of 9,000 square feet in this area. So that's why this one will see the RHB, because the lots around it are 9,000 square feet. St. Michael's is therefore being recommended for RHB zoning as well, instead of RNXC as initially proposed. In other words, the church will have the same residential zoning as the surrounding neighborhood. Continuing down Augusta, we have Trinity United Methodist Church. The church owns 3 total parcels. Today, the zoning across the entire site is R6. We are recommending to take these parcels to RHC, the same proposed zoning as the residential lots that front Augusta, and which is consistent with the R6 zoning today. Any questions so far? All right. Next, we have last for Augusta Street is Augusta Heights Baptist Church. The church parcel is currently split between OD zoning along Augusta and R6 along Old Augusta. The initial recommendation was for MX2 across the entire site. However, to keep the consistency, we are proposing to maintain the current zoning split and make the rear portion RHC. So it would remain MX2 along the front, like to like, and RHC along the back, like to like, where it's currently R6 today. Okay. So before we move on to the next place of worship, which is on a different street, there is an item that arose during the review of the Augusta Street zoning that we want to make known to the Planning Commission. Greenville 2040 identifies all of Augusta Street as a proposed corridor on the future land use map. Corridors are proposed for mixed-use development with height and density that connect the different nodes. There is interest from residents in this area in removing the residential neighborhood portion of Augusta Street from the proposed corridor designation from Augusta Place to Riverside Drive. The road diet that was implemented under the future land use map was adopted supports keeping this area of Augusta low-density residential, and it's essentially between Westminster and Blythe Academy. For legal reasons and state law, the comprehensive plan cannot be amended through the development code process. However, this request may be considered at an upcoming Planning Commission meeting or as part of our 6-month review period that we've discussed previously with Planning Commission. Any proposed changes to the future land use map must go to the Planning Commission for recommendation and City Council for final approval. But one thing I want to make sure that we're keeping clear about today is that's what's in front of you today is the zoning. Keep in mind that the comprehensive plan is an advisory document and that zoning is the actual enforcement mechanism. The proposed zoning changes we just covered will keep the new zoning consistent with the existing single-family zoning from Westminster Pres to Blythe Academy. So everything that is currently single-family in this area under the proposed changes in the code that were presented by staff, everything stays single-family to single-family. And I think because the zoning is what is actually the codification, it's important to make that distinction. Okay, one more church to look at, or a place of worship. So now we're going over to West Greenville along Reach Street on the far side of Unity Park. New Hope Missionary Baptist Church, located at 25 Owen Street, is zoned RM1 under today's LMO. We are suggesting it go to RNC instead of RC2 as initially proposed. The adjacent property is RN20 in the county, which allows 20 units per dwelling. So you can see that this property is surrounded on all 3 sides with the exception of one by county property. That county property is zoned RN20 in the county. The RNC is more consistent with today's RM1, in our opinion, than RC2 and still allows for multifamily development. So that is our change because staff made a concerted effort to review all places of worship within the city and look at the zoning. And these are the changes that we have come up with. We looked at 317 properties over the last week as we start to look to make sure that we're looking at everyone across the board for these recommendations. Before we move on from our places of worship, I wanted to share that our goal in doing this was to keep these parcels as consistent with today's existing zoning as possible. If a church sells land or would like to redevelop in the future, it must comply with the assigned zoning district, or it may request a rezoning, which requires notifying surrounding property owners, public hearing at Planning Commission, and final approval by City Council. There would be plenty of opportunity for public review and input for these rezonings should they be requested in the future. Are there any questions thus far before we move on? Go ahead, Jeff.
So you looked at all the church properties,
Yes.
and these are the ones that you feel are requiring a change.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. The row of commercial properties along North Street is currently zoned RNXC. And representative for these property owners have requested MX5 through here, mostly due to the additional commercial uses allowed in the MX districts. The property backs up to Richland Cemetery. These parcels are bookended by MX2 properties around North Point and the Park Avenue Gym to the south. Staff supports the change. However, we would recommend MX2 at this time for these properties. We're open to Planning Commission's feedback on that. We looked at MX2 and MX3. We think that MX5 is too intense. So that's something that we would like your feedback on. Okay, the next one. This next one was a mapping error for a parcel next to the Verde Fire Station. There is a small portion of a privately owned parcel next to the city-owned fire station property that shares a parcel number with 2 other properties across Old Sulphur Springs Road. The fire station was zoned CV Civic, and the small piece on the corner inadvertently received CV when the map was drawn, which then extended to the pieces that shared the same parcel number. Private property is not intended to have a CV designation. Staff proposes these areas receive BG and RC2 designations as shown on the screen to correct this mapping error. Moving on, Verde owns this parcel on Salters Road, which has high visibility from I-85. The current lighting office is located on the opposite side of the interstate. Verde has requested a more intensive zoning classification for this site that would allow for a wider range of office and commercial uses. Staff supports more intensive zoning for this site and recommends an MX3 at this time. Just as a reminder, the property is currently zoned S1. Before we end our presentation, I wanted to revisit the few items that staff is looking for Planning Commission to weigh in on as part of its recommendation. Accessory dwelling units. Accessory dwelling units have been proposed in the RH districts to provide additional housing options throughout the community. At public input sessions in 2022 leading up to the new code, residents that participated expressed majority support for secondary dwelling units such as carriage houses, mother-in-law suites, and garage apartments, but did not want them used for short-term rentals. We've really tightened up in the code on short-term rentals. As currently proposed in the code, ADUs may be detached or attached to the principal structure on the lot. Some property owners believe that ADUs should not be permitted because they are concerned it will change the single-family nature of the neighborhood. Others are advocates for ADUs and the opportunities that they provide for families and affordable housing. Staff proposed additional ADU standards in the March 15 revised code. Additional changes were proposed in the staff report. Staff is recommending including an owner occupancy requirement for either the principal dwelling unit or the ADU. Staff vetted this requirement with affordable housing experts, and the occupancy requirement did not seem to be an overwhelming concern that would affect affordability. Last time, we also mentioned a sliding scale for maximum ADU size up to 1,000 square feet based on the square footage of the primary home, similar to the city of Asheville. We have their chart on the next slide. If there is interest in something like this, staff can prepare this and submit it to the commission prior to our next meeting. Otherwise, the general cap of 1,000 square feet would still be in effect. The reason we like the scale is that you can scale the ADU in relationship to the scale of the primary structure. Staff would be in support of the scale.
Quick question on that, Shannon.
Yes.
It still is only a single dwelling though, right?
Single dwelling only.
Only. It
Only.
could not be a even.
It would be a violation of the zoning classification.
Okay.
Single family only, single dwelling only. Okay. As discussed previously, Verde presented unique challenges to the consultants and planning staff because their entire neighborhood is zoned S1 under the current land management ordinance. And just for anyone who may be listening this afternoon, S1 is service industrial and is the most wide open zoning classification that we currently have in the city. Approximately 28% of our land is zoned S1 today. The S1 district allows for a broad range of land uses and development types, many of which would be incompatible with the existing residential uses within Verde. Parts of Legacy Square, the commercial town center of the Verde neighborhoods, are already developed, and there is significant neighborhood interest in the remaining undeveloped parcels. Staff held many meetings with the property owners and neighborhood representatives regarding the future zoning at Legacy Square, both before and after the revised March 15 map posting. Staff has not made any changes to the revised map, but understands that there is agreement between Verde Development and the neighborhood representatives as to an acceptable plan. They're still working through the zoning framework for legacy height, square height, and land uses. And they continue to work together, the neighborhood and the developers. I believe they're even having an open house this week, maybe tonight. I don't want to say the wrong date because that would be bad, but I think they're continuing to work together. Planning Commission may provide guidance based on the comments and correspondence received for the public hearing. Staff is willing to work with all parties as to a final zoning framework for this area. So we're just looking for your input at this point, but we'll continue to work with all parties. Next slide. The consultant team and staff labored to find the right zoning classification for the West End. This is a neighborhood that, due to its proximity to downtown and frontage on US Highway 123, Academy Street, ranges from 4 to 6 lanes and has experienced significant development in recent years. And we went through this last time about there's a desire for from the residents to remain low density and low scale. But then we have other property owners that are requesting more height and density in areas interior to the neighborhood. Staff endeavored to propose an acceptable zoning configuration, but understanding the complexity of this area, we welcome additional guidance. Also, for the property owned by the State Employment Office, the staff report includes a recommendation to take this whole site to MX3. Staff had initially applied RNA to the rear portion of the property at the request of the neighborhood. We thought that was a good idea. The neighborhood brought that to us. But then we received a letter from the State Employment Office attorney objecting to the split zone, hence the modification in the staff report back to MX3 across the site. And we're continuing to work on that property. I think that we want to study our options on that property to try to find a solution that works for all. But that is one we would welcome your feedback on. Okay, next. Since we've started working on our presentation, we also received a request to look from the neighborhood to look at staff's recommendations along Pendleton Street in the 1100 block. And it originally had been at RNXC. We had asked for, the property owner had asked for an MX2. We were trying to find an option to meet with them, and the neighborhood would like it to remain at RNXC, which was staff's original recommendation. That has come in within the last 24 hours, and we wanted to make note of it today. This wraps up our presentation. Staff is recommending approval of Z12023 with the modifications listed in the staff report and presented in the record. Planning Commission may have additional changes from the commission members or recommended in response to comments provided in writing or presented at the public hearing. Throughout this process, the city has endeavored to make the code a code that, first and foremost, is intended for the people that live here. That means protecting neighborhoods and ensuring compatible infill development. The additional changes proposed today are presented in that spirit. The code also ensures a vibrant downtown and thriving commercial areas while providing new opportunities for affordable housing, open space, and quality transportation services and infrastructure. It's a balancing act that has thoroughly and thoughtfully considered as part of Greenville 2040, and one that we believe the new development code and zoning map have tried to successfully achieve. And I think that's really important is I think that since we released all of the draft documents January 25th, we've met with over 1,200 people. We've had a lot of outreach. And because of that outreach and because of the input that we've received, we feel like we're continuing to evolve to make a better plan and a better map and a better code. And so I think that we're very fortunate that we live in a community where we can have that dialogue. And that's one of the things that makes Greenville so special is that there's so many people that care and are involved, and we want to make sure that we have the best product forward for the city. And so we're really appreciative of just the amount of input and the thought and the care that people have put into their comments. We have received some really amazing feedback and comments of thoughtfulness that we've really tried to listen and hear each and every one to get us to a better code today. I know I said thank you last time, but would again like to express my sincere appreciation to the professional staff of the city of Greenville. And I'm not gonna get emotional today. But as y'all know how much I care about this staff. I feel very fortunate to work with them each and every day, and they allow me to be up here today. I could not do this job without the incredible men and women of the city of Greenville staff, everyone from our planning department to our police department. I feel like we are such an incredible unit, and I'm so very grateful for them. I hope our community is grateful for them. And as I always say, if you have an opportunity to thank them for their service, please do. To the community, the property owners, residents, developers, stakeholders, nonprofits, business owners, and citizens that came to our public sessions, provided thoughtful comments and feedback, and helped create a better code for the Greenville community, thank you. Thank you for your contributions. Once adopted, the city is committed to reviewing the code at 6 months, 12 months, and annually thereafter to address any issues with the new code. We look forward to working with all parties as part of this ongoing review process to ensure that the code is operational for Greenville and delivers on the promises for the community. And at that, that is the end of our presentation and rebuttal. Thank you for your time. We're happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Shannon. And thank you, staff. Again, Shannon, one quick question before you go. Sorry, you just want to sit down, don't you?
No, that's all right.
I just want to make it abundantly clear about the changes to particularly the church properties.
Yes, ma'am.
You essentially have reviewed all 360 some.
317 is what we have
17,
found.
okay.
And these are our changes today. If we've missed anything in any of our review of our places of worship throughout the community, I would invite people to let us know so that we can review that. We've tried to do a review, and we think that beyond what we've done today, that we're keeping like for like, or that it makes sense. So in a few areas for our larger churches, especially we have a couple of large churches over on Haywood, for example, we gave them a campus zoning. We didn't give them a like for like, we gave them a campus zoning because it's a large campus. And so we did the same for some of our schools. I want to be very clear about that. Our schools are considered campuses. So we have assigned them a campus zoning. So, but if we've missed something, then I want the public to tell us so we can review it too. But we did pull our place of worship code out of our GIS, and staff looked at each and every one that we could find throughout that review, through that land use code in the GIS system.
Okay. So generally the ones you've showed us today are the ones that you guys are recommending.
Yes, we are
essentially
recommending all of them to be changed.
which is essentially a like for like as it sits today.
Exactly.
Okay. Perfect. I just wanted to make that abundantly clear.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you. All right. At this time, I think what I'd like to do, and Commission, I'm open to whatever thoughts you guys have, but what I would like to do is, at this point, give everyone the opportunity to ask questions of staff, talk through concerns or questions or comments or whatever it might be, based on the public hearing that we've heard, all of our correspondence, and then just your general review of the code itself, because we haven't had a chance to comment about it. So I think the best way to do that maybe is just to go one by one. You guys are in for a great afternoon. I know Lynn is super organized down there. He showed it to me. You want to kick us off? Or I think that's the best way to do it. If you have questions for staff or whatever your concerns are, or commentary, if you will share that with us, unless somebody has a better idea of how to do this.
I assume we can jump in if we have
Yes,
follow-ups.
absolutely. Wish we could see each other.
You got a copy? There might be an extra
I
one.
know, he's so organized.
This may take a few minutes. 2.1.2B. It says parking lots, restriping or resurfacing of parking lots would be considered substantial modification. I personally think that restriping or resurfacing of parking lot is the site equivalent of painting a building, and in my mind should trigger code compliance of landscaping or whatever things that that's just my opinion. And I'm sure other people could have a difference of opinion on that. You want to discuss each one individually, or you just want me to kind of roll through these?
I think if you can roll through them, and then I would ask the commission if there's any questions, just to pop in.
All right.
Yep.
RH 8.3F. And there's a lot of other locations that's got some things where there's finished floor elevations related to roads and average roads. As an engineer, I've got concerns about that. There's just a lot of things, a lot of variables. It's very difficult to deal with when you're grading a site. You're trying to get it to earthwork balance, avoid rock, meet ADA requirements, have drainage and fall for detention ponds, sewer and everything else. And if you're tied to some sort of elevation related to the road, that could just complicate that. And it's not, and probably 80 to 90% of the sites, what you're showing would be no problem, but I guarantee there's going to be 5 or 10% that is going to be a real problem. And this isn't an engineering issue, but I'd be a fan of revising the RC2 to RC3 to allow 3-story buildings as right as one of the smaller multifamily options. And talking with a couple of architects and others, and I'll certainly defer to the architects here. I've been told that a 3-story stick-built building without an elevator is the most cost-effective way to build a dwelling unit. If you're building a duplex, triplex, garden-style apartment, whatever it may be, and I'm concerned that if we push it down to a 2-story, that we're artificially lowering the market-based housing stock you could have in an attempt to have a developer be incentivized to go to 4 stories. This is a minor thing, 2.115.5B7, eliminate natural and clarify that 2-to-1 slopes, underground detention and retaining walls for detention have unlimited encroachments. I have some general concerns that redevelopment opportunities are going to be much more difficult under this code. Very difficult, but I won't go into all the details, but there's a lot of sections where that's, sorry about that, Allison, thanks. 19-4.2C1A3. I think that's the section where if you do take the bonus density and go higher to do affordable, then there's some fees that were put on top of that. My view would be you shouldn't make doing affordable housing any more difficult than it already is economically. I would be a fan of eliminating those fees. The section 19-4.4.C, point 3, point A, 2, that has to deal with curb lawns. And it's pretty common to have issues, particularly with Duke Energy and curb lawns, to where you can't exactly meet the curb lawn requirement because you get into all kind of guy wire issues and bends and changes. I just think there needs to be administrative relief on that, if needed. 19-4.6.1C8, and I think D1 as well. That's where you're talking about access points. And if those are city streets, as long as every lot is allowed a drive cut, that's fine. If it's a DOT road, I think trying to put city requirements and DOT requirements together, we're likely to have conflicts. And they, go ahead, Shannon.
Commissioner Soulsby, if we just clarified that, would that address your concern?
I think any clarification said that if it's a DOT road, DOT governs.
They do.
But, and I'm happy at that point.
Okay.
Yeah, that would.
Ultimately, they do have, they trump us.
Right. Well, I mean, I've been in a situation, maybe not in the city of Greenville, where DOT said this, county or city said that, and, we had conflicts. Parking, I love the new parking code. I think there's a lot of great things about it. I do think the food and beverage max should be raised a little bit to allow for a little bit more parking. And it may be in there and I may have missed it, but in the existing code, there are unusual circumstances with Schedule B. And if that's in there, that's great. Or if I need to go over max parking, could I still pay a fee in lieu of?
I'm gonna eventually get this mic to work.
I can hear you really good.
We have that allowance currently in the.
Okay. This is my little, it's one of my little pet peeves is the EV spaces. I'm not a big fan of the city mandating EV spaces, period. I think if we wanted to do that, it should be limited to perhaps hotels or something like that, and it should be a lower percentage. But I spoke with a local electrical engineer, and I think there are some technical issues, according to what he told me, and it was similar to what I already thought. EV chargers can take up quite a bit of power, and I think the proposed code says that you must have the power available, which indicates a transformer. It likely would cause the transformer sizes to be upsized a good bit, and Duke Energy may not allow that. They don't like to give you more transformer than you need. And the larger transformers, there's really big issues with deliverability right now. And there's some other things. You can read all the other stuff. I won't waste everybody's time on that. 4.6.3 C6 CIE, that's talking about interior islands, wanting them to not have curbing, and I guess be quasi rain garden type islands. I don't think that's a good idea. But to actually design a rain garden, you're going to have to control the amount of water that goes into it compared to the surface water that's there. You're going to have to have topsoil and sand mixture in it. You're going to have an underdrain. You're going to have an overflow for when it goes beyond the first flush. There's a lot of technical engineering issues that I think that could give us problems with. I'm okay if you wanted to put something in there and say if you use rain gardens or something like that, instead of doing 1 inch first flush, you could do 1/2 inch because it gets into infiltration as an incentive. I'd be in favor of that. Okay.
That seems workable.
Okay. The stacking 4.6.4.C3 on drive-throughs, I think the ATM and pharmacy requirements are way bigger than you probably need. I think it was 8 spaces.
Yeah, we've looked at that since we received this, and we're looking at lowering the stacking requirement based on the use.
Okay, I think there's a little bit more work needs to be done that, and we can work through that.
I do have a question about the escape lane.
Sure.
Because I do think sometimes when people are at a QSR drive-through, and if they do need to leave because things happen, or like me, they forget their card, that they need an option to be able to get out of the drive-through lane. So
Sure.
Are you thinking that we should not require an escape lane? And I'd like to understand that reasoning.
I think if it's a ground-up new greenfield site, that's probably not an unreasonable requirement. I think if it's a redevelopment, and a lot of banks get redeveloped into QSRs, and sometimes there's not the real estate to do an escape lane, and it makes it complicated. I think there should be some thought given to that. 4.7.4 C1B. It's talking about in-ground units, are commonly called Sutera. I think it said if any portion of it's out of the ground that you have to screen it. Sutera is still going to be maybe 3 feet out of the ground. And we traditionally, right now, we're allowed to screen it with just shrubs. And I think that's a big incentive to use those. And I think that really is the future of urban trash collection. I think that needs to be reworked a little bit to say that if you're only this far above the ground, you don't have to build a screening wall, because ultimately, if you tell somebody they have to build a dumpster enclosure, they're probably just going to put a standard dumpster in.
Yeah, we like the in-ground units, and they're a lot cleaner, and they're less obtrusive especially to neighbors that abut. So we'll look at that.
Okay. 4.8.2 C1, that's the one talking about screening of retaining walls and limiting their height to 10 feet. and having to kind of stagger those. We had that conversation in our last planning commission meeting about the site on Park Avenue. I believe if you need a retaining wall, it's a lot cleaner, easier. It's going to be a shorter wall without the gaps. And I think those 3 foot or so areas that are 8 or 10 feet above the ground have some safety issues. They're sort of inviting to kids to want to play on.
We recently had a retaining wall issue in a residential neighborhood where the retaining wall is quite high. And the way that that residential neighborhood is set up, the back of that retaining wall abuts the rear of an alley that serves other properties. And I would ask if the commission, as you think about retaining walls, do we need to have a limit on them in residential areas? Because that wall was pretty tall, and it was, until it gets screened fully by the shrubbery that has to be planted to screen it, it is an eyesore, I think, to the neighbors that have to abut that. So the retaining walls on commercial sites we tend to see them quite a bit, especially like on Lawrence Road, we see them. And they tend to they're not as noticeable because they might work with the rest of the commercial site. It's a commercial area, but when we get into residential areas with retaining walls, we would appreciate any feedback y'all have on that, if there should be a height limit, because this one at 12 feet was pretty tall in that residential neighborhood.
And I think there are things you can do. I'd also say if the residential area is upstream or uphill and the commercial's downhill and the commercial's looking at the actual wall and the residential's not, I don't think there's as big a concern in my mind about screening. And I'd also say if the walls say behind a building that's not visible from the public road, it may not need as much screening either. But
So quick question, Shannon, just thinking back on the applicant that we had last meeting on the Park Avenue project. I mean, the relief for that, obviously there was not the space to tier that specific wall without, taking the site in a different direction. So does that fall within the relief percentage in that regard?
I think it could.
Because the way this is written, I was just reading, it talks about the 10% in accordance with, I don't know how you percentage base, how you deal with a retaining wall, right?
Yeah. We need some guidance on retaining walls. In commercial areas tends to work fine, but in residential areas, we are experiencing some issues where they are, I think, visually disruptive to the surrounding neighbors.
When you say residential areas, are you speaking about single-family townhomes as opposed to multifamily?
Both, because the condos are a multifamily product, and we did have issues with that too. And it's within an existing, residential area that's got different types of residential, but we are experiencing some issues with retaining walls. I think, like I said, when you're in your commercial areas or some of our business general areas, there's a way to work them into the site, and there's some that work pretty well. I can think of a couple examples on Lawrence Road, but then when you get into residential areas and you have that same height of retaining wall, it seems to be more obtrusive, especially visually, because the buildings are of a smaller scale. So you really start to notice that retaining wall in relationship to the rest of the site.
It's a tricky thing. It can be tricky. It's not in here, and I know I've discussed this with staff before. Did we look into a fee in lieu of for water quality at some point? And really another thing on that, it's on sidewalks, a fee in lieu on sidewalks. And I think you and I have talked about that on another occasion, that would allow, if somebody wanted to put the sidewalk in piecemeal, they could, but if they wanted to pay a fee in lieu of, then the city could collect that money and put sidewalks where they're most needed more.
We have already been working on a policy that we would be bringing forward to you all through engineering and legal. So We're working on a fee in lieu for sidewalks, especially where it doesn't connect to anything, and we could divert those funds to areas with our instep. We have not looked at a policy for family on water quality.
Okay. And the rest of these are some very highly technical stormwater stuff that probably I need to talk to Paul and Clint about.
Okay.
So
You don't want to talk to the planners?
you want to, let's say TSS and isolated row and
You lost me at.
that was my list.
Is there any,
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
are there any questions from the commission for Lynn before we move on? All right. Ms. Pam?
My questions, of course, with the staff have to do with the open spaces and, I may not have as much as Lynn has, but, looking back at my notes, I got quite a few questions, which we'll talk over a period of time. Standards for open spaces, just looking over the GBL 2040 and that 35% of preserving those, preserving that land for open spaces. Let's see, I think it's 4-5. And I'll just read it, and I just have some questions in terms of clarity on a few of the wording pieces of it. It says residential projects. Let's see. That's why it says, while the percentage of unit counts in any project must remain as stated above, averaging of the AMI target percentage may be applied at the administrator's discretion to allow for lower or higher AMI as conditions allow. And I realize that that's part of the change. And I don't remember what is that the underline means that this was added in terms of based on the change of feedback from the first meeting. Okay, so the part, just clarification where it says applied at the administrator's discretion to allow for lower or higher AMI as conditions allow. How would you interpret that after all is said and done?
It's the averaging, so that, let's say that we want to meet a developer comes and says, I want to meet the 15%, 80% AMI, but they're willing to do within that 15%, a couple of what we call deeper affordable units at a 40% AMI. But they would have to probably do 2 units at 100% AMI to offset that. But as long as the average equaled the 80%, we were trying to look at that as we talked to some of our multifamily developers that are trying to figure out ways to do affordable, that if you can do an averaging, it would allow them to do some deeper affordability. So they can either do everything at a 60% AMI or an 80% AMI, but in order to do the deeper affordability level for the loss of rent income from those units, if you want 40%, it's going to have to be averaged with some 100% in order to get there. So that's why we put that in there as a provision to allow that if you all support it and if council supports it. It's an option to try to figure how we get some deeper affordability with our units. It can also be used in conjunction. The county adopted their MCIP earlier, this multi-county industrial park. Sorry, y'all, I talk alphabet soup sometimes, so forgive me. So the multi-county industrial park earlier this year policy, which had, if when the county will consider your tax abatement, that you have to do 20%, 80%, 60%, 60%, 20%, 40%. So we're trying to figure out how we could also use that incentive along with a bonus incentive in the code and align those so that maybe we see some affordability used in our multifamily projects.
Okay, so, and this might be a legal word, maybe Logan, you can answer this for me, where it says administrator's discretion. What would that mean? It's a little ambiguous, so I'm just kind of concerned about, like, after any of you leave and someone else is interpreting this under what their perception of discretion means. Is that a legal term, or what is that? Explain discretion. Because you all can have different discretion. So what does that actually mean, or what would the intent? Point of view can answer, just either.
I think it's intended to mean as conditions allow. That's some language we're looking at. But I think that, if that's an area you want us to pay attention to, and that's a particular provision that you feel could use some clarification, we'll be happy to take a look at that and come back at the next meeting.
Okay. All right. So just find that. The other part, well, there's a few parts, but this will be my last question along, and I want to circulate through. The next section says, in addition to meeting the affordability requirement above, each applicant must pay a one-time open space mitigation fee of $250 for every additional square foot above, beyond what is permitted by right. So the $250 was decided by what reason or purpose, the $250? How did the $250 come up?
The original was at $5, and we were told through members of our development community that that would not make, their pro formas wouldn't work, and we would not actually see an incentive from that. So we tried to lower that, and we also removed the $5,000 fee in order to make sure that the incentive still works, that we can see some affordability. And we may have to continue to look at this section over the next 6 months and a year. But we had multiple of our development community and apartment builders in particular say that with the fee, they wouldn't be able to provide the affordability. And so we're trying to find that right balance to ensure that when used, that there is an option to use that affordability.
And how often would that be reviewed, that price?
So that could be set by Planning Commission as a part of your annual review. Unlike our current ordinance, one of the things that staff wants this ordinance to do is have a required mandatory annual review for anything that may have occurred or needs to be reviewed yearly, such as that price. Because things are going to change, conditions are going to change, market conditions will change, as we well know. So I would say that you could make that part of your annual review. We could even add language to that section that states that as part of the annual review if you would like us to.
Okay. And on top of that, the management of that, it goes into open spaces, but just lost my thought that quick. I do have a question.
I'm here all night.
Well, my question is, all right, so with that, how would you said now annually they'll be reviewed, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So what would determine whether or not that needs to be addressed? Is it based on the feedback from the developers or something that?
It's based on a combination of feedback. So as we move, if you'll recall back in 2021, we did multiple text amendments that spring based on some concerns that were shared with us through City Council. And when we spent a lot of staff time and a lot of y'all's time, a lot of Mr. Soulsby's time, a lot of trying to come up with the text amendments, and those text amendments were meant to protect neighborhoods. We looked at how to improve our lighting standards, how to improve our stormwater standards, all of which we've carried over into the new code, or even made more stringent in the new code as an effort to protect those. And I say that to say that that was brought to us by our City Council and a direct request from them. And I think what we would like to do is to keep a file and running, list of all of the things that we're receiving and try to address them all together so that we're not being reactionary and we're giving you all time to really think about them. And so that would be anything that's in the mandatory review. So it could be input that's received from the community, from neighborhoods, from developers, from the Planning Commission, from our City Council, from staff, as we start to notice, maybe this provision isn't working the way that we intended it to. We expect that that's going to happen. And so I think that when you look at our current code, and there's a lot of things that conflict with each other, that's a result as of, well, let's fix this to address this problem, but oh, we forgot to address this part of the code to address, and it causes conflict. I can tell you an area where that happens a lot is with townhomes. Because we changed the code in 2018 for them to be considered as a single-family attached product instead of a multifamily product. But if you look in the code, there are some conflicts under the multifamily standards as to whether townhomes have to meet those standards or not, even though we consider that a single-family product because they're sold as a fee simple property, just like a single-family detached product. So I say that to say that we want to be very thoughtful about that moving forward. And we want to keep a running list and then bring it to planning commission and say, just like we did tonight, here's all of the things that staff thinks needs to be changed. What do you all think need to be changed? And let's look at these each one annually.
Okay, this is like a cherry link now, the questions that after you said that, based on the GVL 2040 preserving as much as 35% of remaining vacant land to protect Greenville's quality of life and environment and to facilitate a new way of growing, which of course is the open spaces. How would you gauge in whether or not those spaces are being protected based on the development if developers are willing to pay that mitigation fee? You know what I'm saying? Are you meeting, how do you know that you're meeting those goals and preserving and maintaining those open spaces based on the way that the development is moving on the code?
So if I understand you, you want to know how we're going to be able to track to ensure that the open spaces remain as open spaces?
Right, and you're being able to reach those goals with the 2040, with the GVL 2040.
So the zoning is one tool. It is not the only tool and can't be the only tool. And I think that I want to make that abundantly clear that, you know, zoning alone won't fix our issues with open space. And one of the ways we're trying to address that is through land acquisition and our continual ask from City Council every year to provide funding for our open space acquisition so that we can preserve property in perpetuity. We bought land last year to do that, and we're trying to always look for options where we have that. But the zoning is only one tool. The open space policy has to also talk about the open space matrix, which we presented in July last year to City Council. This is how we evaluate properties as to whether they meet our goals as a community for open space. And we have to continue to have that as a priority. So the zoning alone can't fix that. It's something that is one tool. The way we do that is to ensure that if they are using the open space bonus, if they choose to dedicate land to the city, that it stay in perpetuity under a conservation easement, so that we know that that open space always stays as open space, or if it's on their site, that we know that they keep that as open space. Now, we do know at times where we think we have an open space and then things there starts to be creep, and that's something that we're going to have to continue to monitor. If they get an open space bonus for that, it's going to have to be monitored annually by staff, just like we would monitor the affordable housing, and that's audited through community development. We're going to have to do the same on the open space. If they're getting the bonus for it, then we have to ensure that we're monitoring that it stays as open space.
Okay, so for non-residential projects, the same thing applies as residential. I'm reading, I'm just confirming that you're giving the same 250 to non-residential and residential.
Yes, we have not made a distinction.
Okay, even if it's a single family resident as well as a multi or MX2 or
Now,
something
single
like that.
family, let me correct myself. We don't do that for single family. It would be multifamily and up. That's for single family, no.
Okay.
But we do have lot coverage requirements that help to preserve open space on existing single family properties.
Okay. And the partial dedication of open space plus partial mitigation fee, what would be the partial mitigation fee? Is there a particular number with that, or what would be that explanation or?
The valuation would have to equal what the 250 valuation would be.
Okay.
So if the valuation of the dedication is, equal to $1 of the 250, then the other would have to be 150 of the 250. If that makes sense. But the valuation would be set, or that would be set by the valuation of the property being dedicated.
Got it. That's all I'll ask right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Shannon, quick question. Do you guys know generally what the percentage of open space is currently in the city?
I don't have that off the top of my head, but I can answer it by the end of, I'm sure you'll take a break at some point this evening.
Yeah.
We'll come back and answer it after break.
Okay.
We have it, I just don't have it right here.
Yeah, I would just be interested. I mean, if Pam's asking for some kind of level of measurement as far as where we are today versus where we are in a year.
We have a percentage, I just don't,
That's fine.
but I'll get it for you.
Okay. All right. Any questions of Pam? Anything she's brought up? All right, Jeff?
Right. I broke my comments into map comments and then code comments. And I won't go through anything that I had that Lynn also had. On 2.1.2A, talks about activity that is regulated. What would not be considered a change that says get that. 2.12A2 addition, any substantial expansion or enlargement of an existing building or structure includes activity that increases. But what would not be included? Is there anything that would not be included? Or is it just all activity?
So I would think that, I would call it, similar to like a porte-cochere, but, or like a carport, because you're just basically a pole barn where you have poles and a roof, but you're not really increasing the floor area because you're not enclosing it. That is how I would answer that question.
Okay.
So would that include like a patio for?
No patio.
Okay.
No. Patio is considered outdoor living space. We wouldn't consider that part of an addition to a building.
I guess I was thinking for like more like a business use, like a covered eating patio or.
I don't think we would, no, because it's not included within it's not enclosed. It's an outdoor area. We want to encourage that.
Okay.
We want to encourage activation of our commercial uses and spaces and have places for people to enjoy the outdoors. So we want to encourage that.
So any space that's heated?
Yes.
Essentially.
Any space that's heated or closed in, because garages can be unheated, but they're closed in.
Right.
So
okay.
Think of it as a pole barn or a covered patio, I think is a good way to put it.
Let's build some pole barns. We need a bunch of those in the city.
They wouldn't meet the code.
That was the first laugh of the night, okay. Same page, and I swear I'm not going page by page. Under 2.1.2F, it talks about maintenance and repair. Would window replacements be considered that?
No.
Okay, even though replacing windows, window grids can drastically change the appearance of the house, that would not be considered that?
Only in a historic district where they have to meet, but only in a historic district.
Okay. 2.2.2 under RHA, accessory structures. Seems like that it says the rear setback should, there's inconsistency between RHB and RHA. One was 5 feet and one was 10 feet. Is there a reason for that?
My glasses on. Yes. It's because,
Yeah, accessory structures.
it's because it's a larger lot size. RHA is larger lot size.
I guess my concern is when you have space behind something, then stuff gets back there. I was going to use another word, but not. And so.
So your argument is if it's moved closer to the property line, that it has less.
Yes. I've always thought that the best screening is actually could be, a building. I'm thinking about at least a year plus ago on Pendleton Street, there was a proposed business in a house and they had a detached garage and there was some issue of where that was placed. And actually, I think that closer to the property line, as opposed to having to put a building, the rear of a building, and then you got a fence behind it. You just created this 5 to 10 foot place to put stuff. And usually that's junk. So I'm not asking for an answer. It's just that I'm not sure why just the bigger lot requires an extra 5 feet.
We were just thinking of it as because the lots are larger, that it allows for that additional space. And it's more in keeping with kind of how the development of those areas usually occur. We don't have a lot of RHA in the city with the exception of the Gower area. And so we were trying to think about that they have pretty large lots and seem to be more in keeping with the existing development. That was our thought.
Okay. I just want to, I agree with Lynn with that zoning should not control finished floor elevation. I think I'm 100% in agreement that you want to get, particularly in the residential, you want to get those structures in the air. But I think you can accomplish that in so many ways.
We changed that. That was one of our recommended changes based on our feedback through our reviews about the finished floor elevation.
In RH and RN districts, I completely understand the reasoning behind restricting massing, both width and depth. I understand the width because you could have somebody buys 2 lots and they put, mansion in the middle of something. I'm not sure I understand the depth, and particularly in the RN where we've restricted that to 90 feet, because if you're standing in the road and you got a 40-foot wide lot, or I'm not sure anybody can tell depth. Now on the side, if it's on a corner, yes, you can, but if you're in the middle of a block, whether it's 80 feet deep, 90 feet deep, 100 feet deep, I'm not sure that anybody can tell. And particularly when you have restrictions on coverage, other parking requirements, I'm just not sure that stopping it at 90 feet, I understand there's restrictions, you can pull your house in X number of feet, but I'm just not sure that depth, and if you think about a single family house with a downstairs bedroom, when you start putting in entry, kitchen, all that space, you're at 90 feet rather quickly. So
we heard that same thing from some of our builders who are trying to make sure that they have a master down when they're doing it, because most people want a master down. And you can do the offset to give you the additional depth. The main reason for the depth came out of the infill work that was done several years ago. And a lot of our neighborhood representatives told us that they wanted the depth was a concern to them, because when they came out the back of their house, not making sure that, that the depth just overwhelmed them on either side or behind them. And that was a conversation, but we're open to the depth. I think that what matters the most in all of those is the width, right? Because that's what sets your rhythm on your street, is your width.
100% agree. Yeah.
So that we're open to, suggestions on that, but that width that kind of starts to set the rhythm of how each building is in the form goes as you're on the street.
Okay. I'm not sure that I can't find it in here. I've said it several times in planning commission. We do define what an alley is. We do define some better guidelines, but is there something in here that says that we can plat off of an alley?
We can what?
Yes, through sublots,
Flat off of an.
through sublots. I think that we've addressed that.
Is that what, I saw that and I was like, is that what they're talking about?
Yes. Well, that's not the only reason either. And Chris is looking at it for us. I think I see him writing, but I feel confident that the answer to that is yes, based on sublots, but they'll correct me if I'm wrong.
Okay, and speaking of an alley, it says that the right of way of an alley should be 20 to 30 feet. What's the reason for 30? I mean, 30 feet is a road. I mean, is there some situation that staff would say that alley needs to be, a right of way needs to be wider?
Yes. And that comes into when you get buildings over 30 feet tall and you have fire access needs. And under the fire code, you start to get into 26.
But on a single family situation or a townhome situation?
Townhomes.
I understand
Townhomes, you would have to still meet we still have to meet that fire code requirement of a 26-foot wide. And Lynn and I know about this from another project recently that came through, but it's got to be 26-foot wide. That's under fire code.
But I do think that there's ways that you can provide that 26 feet for the feet of the truck through driveway placements. So as long as that what's it called, Lynn? When they put the,
Outriggers.
yeah, the outriggers, when those outriggers go out, as long as they're not on ground, they want to be on something that's paved. But if you design it so that your driveways, your access into your garage can provide that. So that's like some consideration to that. Um, 211.5.5 mechanical equipment and waste receptacles, saying that they cannot encroach. I would think that it might be okay to encroach as long as they're screened.
That's possible, yes. I need to talk to Tristan about that and confirm that that's possible if they're sprinkled.
All right. 2.11.8 is talking about parking setbacks, and there's a reference said that you're not allowed to park in your driveway between the street and the house. How are we going to regulate that?
Zoning enforcement.
Okay, get ready. Okay. In 19.4.6.5 talks about garages. I think it says that garages should be 10 feet on a lot, 40 feet or wider. The garage should be 10 feet behind the front facade. What's the definition of that front facade?
The wall plane,
So where that front, typically where the front door is.
yes.
It seems like to me that, I mean, if you think about the front door and then if you happen to have a porch.
If the porch covers the whole front of the house, I think we would be open to considering that. Not just a
Like 8
stoop,
feet?
but if you've got we have options where you have the porch that runs the full length of the front house. And I think if you had that situation and it was 8 feet in depth, that you could then start to move it back behind that. We're open to considering that if that's something the
Okay,
planning
yeah.
commission would desire.
Because my thought was 8 feet rather than 10.
Oh, 8 feet, okay.
Said the garage.
I'd want us to set a minimum porch width or depth. Though.
Agreed. Yeah,
Okay.
sure. Garage is on less than 40-foot wide lot. Says that garage has to be located behind the house. So in an awful lot of older neighborhoods, on a narrow lot, you have the primary house, and that primary house is going to be shifted to one side or the other so that your driveway can go beside your house. But a lot of times that garage is here. So house here, garage here. The code is saying that has to be here, that the garage door cannot face the primary street, but I'm not sure that if you put the garage here, you have a turnaround, you've actually taken up more of your yard space. So I'm not sure that on a potential lot, particularly if you put it at the very back of your lot. So let's say the lot's 100 to 120 feet deep. I'm not sure that having that garage facing the street is terrible. And there's an awful lot of houses in neighborhoods that's the traditional way. Go back to that house on Pendleton, it was exactly that way.
Yeah, and we have a lot in North Main too, like that.
Now, I believe that that the garage should not be the main architectural feature of your house, which it is in a lot of places. And you can dress up your garage door, put windows in those garage doors so it doesn't have to be not positive. So, like.
Noted.
Okay. I agree 100% on the electrical charging infrastructure. I mean, 1% of cars today are electric, 5.8% of new cars are electric sold. So I think maybe a sliding percentage over the next 5 to 7 years, something. I do agree that Duke Power is going to weigh in on some of this. In 19-4.8 fences, fence type E, it was, I think, originally 7, then it dropped to 6, then it's back up at 7. I just strongly believe that a side yard fence should be no more than 6 feet. The higher the fence, there's a reason that you're making it higher. You're trying to hide something or hide something that you don't want to see.
What section is that?
19.4.8 under fences, but
Which one are you talking about specifically?
fence type E. It says it's now 7. I think it it started at 7, then it dropped to 6, and then it went back to 7. Says fences are not allowed in a required drainage or utility easement. Many of our single-family areas, you've got side yard drainage and utility easements on plats. Even though there may not be a pipe there, it's still a drainage easement. So I'm not sure that, so if your property line is here and you move that fence over, let's say it's a 15-foot or 10-foot drainage easement on your side property line, 5 and 5. So now you're gonna have a fence 5 feet off the property. So no one's gonna maintain that 5 feet. I think if a person wants to build a fence in a drainage easement where there's not a pipe, they understand that if work has to be done, that fence comes down and they've got to repair it. So aren't you putting on, I mean, you're putting drainage and utility easements on all property lines, sidelines?
For most detached stuff, yes, there's drainage and utility easement, 5 or 10 feet straddled on that. That's a great point. You'd end up with basically 10-foot alleys between 2 fences that would be no man's land,
And
essentially.
And people just throw stuff over their fence.
Yeah. Even if there's a pipe there, a fence over the pipe, I think everybody just needs to realize you put a fence in an easement, that easement probably says they're gonna come do their repairs, tell you to put your fence back up yourself.
Agreed.
Would you agree that, or would you be open to us having that as a standard note added to our subdivision plats so that when property owners get a copy of their plat at closing, that they would be made aware that if they do put any appurtenances such as fences in the easements, that they could be subject to removal and wouldn't be replaced? Because I think it's just making sure that our property owners, if they buy the property, are aware that if there's an easement on the fence, or that if they put something in the easement, that, you know, that if for some reason Duke had to get in there and they come and take that fence down, that they're not going to put the fence back up.
Yeah, agreed, 100%.
Okay.
No brainer. 5.1.2C traffic impact analysis says that those analysis have to be between Labor Day and Memorial Day, tying it to school, but school starts well before Labor Day now. We're basically saying for 3.5 months, you cannot do a traffic impact study. And I think there needs to be some flexibility because there are some ways to do that. There could be, somebody may have done, DOT has done some traffic counts. I just think if somebody puts a piece of property under contract in April and they can't do their traffic study until after Labor Day, it becomes complicated.
We could tie it to school calendars. I think it's just really important that it not be, because we have different schools on different school calendars, and we have a lot of private schools that don't follow the same calendar as our public schools. We want to make sure that our schools, that it's done on a day when all schools are in session.
Agreed.
Because that does impact the total traffic numbers. And anytime that someone's done a traffic study when any of our schools are out of session, there's always question to the validity of the traffic study because of just not counting each and every one of those cars that are part of school traffic. So I think that we can be flexible on that date, but it would need to be when all schools are in session, not just Greenville County schools, or all the schools within a certain radius. Because not all of our schools follow the same calendar. A good example was spring break. Recently, we've got, you know, Greenville County was out a certain week in March. We got kids out this week after Easter. So I think that we just want to make sure that we're tying it to when all the schools in a certain radius are in session.
Yeah, we've said that the administrator is going to have the ability to determine when a traffic impact study is required.
That's correct.
And I think if you could just add that to their responsibility.
Okay.
You know, because it could be some flexibility.
Okay.
So, I've only got like 6 more pages. This is just a general broad comment about tying the affordable housing to open space fees. And the affordable housing that I do is mostly single family detached and townhomes. So I'm not doing multifamily apartments. I have not seen anyone who is really buying into the fact that we can tie those two together and it's going to make a difference in the affordable housing. So I would think that the bonus is actually too low and the AMI is too high. So, but I don't have the answer. I think you've probably already heard that. With regard to planning commission duties going forward, I guess one of our responsibilities now has been to, there is a review of multifamily developments to some degree. And that's being, the way I read it, that's being taken out, correct? And that's just a concern that I have because I can think back of the last several years where this body has made, I think, substantial comments to multifamily to make, even postpone some, hopefully make them better, not only architecture, but site planning. So it's just a concern of mine that.
We did add that they would have to still have neighborhood meetings. And anything over 12 units would have to meet with the neighborhood so that the neighborhood is fully aware. But we can talk to the consultants about that and go back. We've had lots of conversations over multifamily, so.
Okay. ADUs. Would you agree that one of the purposes of adding an ADU or having ADUs is affordable housing and missing middle?
Yes.
So it concerns me that, and I 100% agree that the owner needs to live on the property because then you could have someone who buys a property, builds an ADU, and then rents out both. So,
Correct, and I think that was not the only concern, but a primary concern of.
Agreed.
Of neighbors about, yes.
So now that's called an investment, so we're not really worried. But it concerns me that we are going to allow the individual who builds an ADU to then live in either. I would think that if the goal is missing middle housing and affordable housing.
Oh, that they should have to live in the primary.
They should live in the primary because.
That's fine, yeah.
Because
okay.
if I build an ADU and I live in, and the house that you live in is going to be bigger because we're talking about some scale, capping at 1,000. So I live in a 2,500 square foot house. I build an ADU of 1,000, and then I move into the ADU and I rent out the more expensive house. We haven't done anything for affordable housing.
Fair enough.
So.
Can I follow up on just the ADU thing in general? So if you have like a 15-foot, 100 square foot house and you have a attached garage, but no living space whatsoever, is that still considered an ADU?
No, that's just considered an accessory structure.
But then you can't build an ADU.
Not currently under the code.
Well, no, I mean, under this one.
That's, well, not if you can if you meet the lot coverage, but you can't have two, they can't both be, you have a detached garage and you want to put something right next to it that's an accessory dwelling unit. I think you could under the code as long as you meet all of the code requirements for lot coverage, but that would be really hard to meet for most of our lots. It's going to almost physically be impossible because the fact is that most of our lots in the city are under 10,000 square feet.
Right.
So the issue then becomes, can you convert the garage or add on to the garage? And it would have to meet the current ADU standards that you all put in place.
So let's say you convert the garage or whatever, but at what point in time does it become an ADU? And I've read it, but is it just a bathroom, a living space, that garage? What converts it into one?
So it really comes down to the type of electricity that's used and the type of appliances that are installed. So an accessory structure, we would not allow for anything that would allow for laundry hookups, kitchen hookups such as a stove, and you can't have a bathroom in an accessory structure. It usually comes down to laundry hookups and kitchen hookups. So that is the difference between an accessory structure and then a dwelling unit. What we know is happening is that they come through to do an accessory structure, gets through code, it gets permitted, it gets finalized through the CO process. And then I'm sure that there's many that have been retrofitted after the fact to allow for kitchen and laundry hookups, to allow for that to be used as an ADU.
Okay. So then, it'd be my understanding too, though, if you have a garage and it's got but a stove and a washing machine, you can't rent out the entire piece of property then, what we're suggesting.
So if they converted the garage to an ADU, they would have to meet the owner occupancy requirement in that one of the units, which we're talking about now being the primary unit, would have to be occupied by the owner of the property. They could not rent out both.
And is that regardless of when that structure may have been built?
Yes, regardless.
So if a guest house was built 50 years ago, you're potentially, then you can't rent out your property.
Yeah, we wouldn't
So
allow it
that-
today now unless they have a special exception.
Sure,
So-
but if it was built 50 years ago,
That's right.
I don't know if that would have been the code requirements.
Well, it's not allowed currently under the code. This would allow them under the new code to do that.
Well, currently though, they could rent out their property.
They could rent out the entire property, yes, that's right. So we have an example of this, and it's with bed and breakfast. So we do have some bed and breakfast in town that have been permitted through a special exception. And those could continue to operate as is because they have a vested right through their special exception that they received that runs with the land. So I could see where we do have a couple of bed and breakfasts where they have the unit, the back unit that could be rented out. But then usually for a bed and breakfast, the owner has to be on the property because they're there to operate and they have to provide breakfast every day. So just something to think about.
Madam Chair, let me ask a question. If I wanted to respond to something that Jeff mentioned, would it be better to do it now or wait until, I don't want to disrupt the flow.
Yeah, why don't we let him get, if you'll mark it down?
Yeah.
Diane, we're gonna take a break when he finishes, so when we come back, I think we can go there.
And I was told to speak up louder, so normally people don't tell me to do that. I've got some map comments that, and I don't know how you want to address specifically Verde or West End. I can push those to the end. During last public hearing, we heard from those organizations that are providing shelter and the concerns that they have. Did the staff give any thought to how to rectify that, or should it be rectified?
Well, there was an inaccuracy that they would only be allowed in industrial zones, and that's not true. They would be allowed in business and industrial zones and a special exception in MX zones. So I think they're allowed in more locations than maybe was understood. And so, at this time, we have not contemplated any additional changes because of the fact that they would be allowed in more than just the IX zone.
So talking specifically about Miracle Hill and I guess Salvation Army, if there was an improvement made to those pieces of property, would that improvements expansion be allowed, assuming they met all the other requirements?
I think that the proposed zoning that we have for that would require a special exception, but I don't have that. I'm going off of memory. I need to verify that. And after the break, I'll give you a definitive answer because I want to check that and make sure.
So thinking of the Salvation Army property, could that be classified a campus?
Yes, Austin confirmed that they're both proposed as MX2, which would require a special exception, which requires Board of Zoning Appeals approval.
So if either one of those properties, they wanted to expand, assuming that they could expand, or knock a building down and build another building, that would have to come back for a special exception.
Yes,
Yeah, I guess my
but
concern.
improvements to their property would not. So I think that's really important. So if they want to do landscaping, sidewalk work, parking lot work, anything of that nature, that would not require a special exception. And I bring that up because I know that Miracle Hill is planning to do some improvements to their property, which we fully support. It will be really nice, this, what they're planning to do in terms of, they want to add an outdoor seating area. They've got some landscaping that they're trying to add. They're adding some additional parking. They're trying to expand the sidewalks. And so, I think that, that would not require a special exception, but if they wanted to add on to the building, that would trigger a special exception.
I guess my concern is that if either one of those organizations are, and I know there's other organizations out there, location of those facilities is important. So you don't want that location out on I-85. But a lot of people would love to see it on I-85, okay? And it's concerning to me that if one of those organizations or another one of the organizations serving that their population wanted to expand, assuming that they could expand, I think having to go to a special exception, which would mean public hearing, you know what that means. And it's just concerning to me. Green Line Spartanburg, and I would also apply this to some of the other special emphasis neighborhoods. So Green Line Spartanburg from Wade Hampton to East North Street, Stone Avenue to Harrington. We're proposing a RH. Got it. It's an RNA, I believe. Is it RNA? But if you look across the street on Overbrook, across Overbrook, we're at RHC. And it concerns me that when it comes to gentrification, that the gentrification that could happen, that's been happening, is typically when a single family house is built in one of those neighborhoods. You tear down a house and you build a bigger house. And so it seems like to me, particularly in like Green Line Spartanburg, we may be not encouraging that, but allowing it. And I would think we'd want to put more restrictions. And I think you could apply that to Green Line Spartanburg, some areas of Sullivan.
We worked with Greater Sullivan on their zoning classification, and we would be open to your suggestions for Green Line Spartanburg. The city does own a lot of property through there, as well as one other property owner. And we do want to make sure that we keep that area affordable. So if the zoning doesn't allow for that, then we do need to review it, because that is an area of high importance and focus for the city in ensuring affordability.
I know that to be the case,
So
that's all I have, with the exception of some Verde West End comments. I can hold those. I'm done.
thank you.
Thank you. And
Council,
can I say one more thing? Can I say one more thing?
Yes, sir.
There was an awful lot of praise that went to the staff and some others. I'd like to also say appreciation to the consultants that have been working hard with the staff and all this. And I know you think that as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Randolph. Chair, it's been about an hour and 45 minutes. I don't know if you'd like to entertain a break at this moment.
That was my plan. Ms. Chair.
Okay.
So we're going to take a break for 15, 20 minutes and we'll be back.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank y'all for bearing with us for a second. No. Jeff is still finishing.
No, I'm finished.
Oh, you're finished. All right, Miss Diane. Nope.
Well, all right. I have only a few things, and one of them has to do with the accessory dwellings. So staff, could you bring that slide up that had the sliding scale? That's something I'd like to learn just a little bit more about. Diane, can you speak a little bit closer to the mic? Okay. I'm not talking loud enough. Mr. Family would find that amazing. Thank you. Okay. I just want the staff to give us a little bit more information about this.
Yes. One of the things that we heard during receiving feedback from our neighborhoods concerning the accessory dwelling units is that the ADU could possibly overwhelm the primary home depending on the size. And so the size of the ADU was something that seemed to be a very sensitive issue. And we looked at other locations and found that there are cities that do it on a scale based on the primary square footage, the square footage of the primary home. And so we thought that this is an option if we wanted to scale in relationship to the primary dwelling unit. And so if you had, 1,000 square foot home in Asheville, you can only do 70% for your ADU, which is 700 square feet. At some point, you are going to hit the larger number, and you can see that's how they did it. And we would want to do the same here. We would create a sliding scale with our max being 1,000 square feet. And it really comes down to, in a lot of places, this one is based on 70% of the main home or the main primary residence. A lot of ordinances will set it at 50% of the primary residence. But it's something that is of consideration if we want to encourage and see the ADUs built, but can be smaller at a smaller maximum to protect our existing neighborhoods. That was really the whole intent of that. So,
Okay, so what you're suggesting is if we did that here, then the numbers on that chart would not be the same as what we would have here. We would allow a detached ADU to go as far as 1,000 square feet and stop there.
yes, that's right.
Okay.
No, at this point, unless you all increase the maximum for any ADU would be 1,000 square feet.
Okay.
Now, that doesn't mean it has to be, if somebody wants to build a 500 or 600 square foot ADU, they could do that also.
Okay. So, but they just couldn't go beyond 1,000?
No, ma'am.
Okay. And then while we're talking about ADUs, I wanted to go back to something that Commissioner Randolph suggested, and that was allowing the property owner to have to live in the primary dwelling. But let me give you an example of how that might not work well, because I know that one of the reasons that other communities allow accessory dwellings is to encourage or to allow for granny flats. So somebody's mother or parents could move in behind them. Well, if in today's economy, a lot of times the parents can afford the house, but the children can't. And so in that case, the parents might want to live in the accessory dwelling and rent the larger dwelling to maybe their own children. So I just wanted to throw that out. So while we have this discussion, we think about that too.
Certainly, we've had people talk to us about, during our learning labs that we hosted earlier in March, I almost said earlier this month, and I forget it's April, we did have people that came out and talked to us about ADUs where they said that they would want to build an ADU to, and eventually move into so that their children could have the primary home and then they would live in the accessory dwelling unit. So we did hear that during our learning labs.
And I would have no problem with that kind of arrangement. I mean, it's a family arrangement, when that's a relative, something like that.
Now, how do we codify that? That is the question.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna ask.
It's the same person that's checking the
Checking the
driveway
driveway.
parking. You just do that too.
Okay, there's one specific item that one of our letter writers wrote about, and I don't think we've addressed that in our discussions yet. And that was in the RNA district. He gave us a really good example of why we might not want to reduce the lot line from 5 to 4 feet. And in his case, it was because there wasn't enough space between his and the house next door for the workmen to get done what they needed to do as they were building a new structure. And he sent pictures. And so I think we need to consider not changing that from 5 to 4 feet. I see that it's already 4 now in the amended code. So that's one thing I'd like for us to either discuss or put on the table and talk about next time.
Okay.
West Greenville. Can we bring that map up that y'all talked about tonight? There was a request from the development community to change the classification so that they could build higher story buildings
along.
Maybe you're
Pendleton
talking
Street?
about the 1100 block that I mentioned earlier.
Yes, yes. And I guess my question is, would that fit with the West Greenville special plan? If we were to allow that change? I mean,
Unfortunately, Commissioner Eldridge, I don't think that was included in the micro area plan. I don't think that the boundary
section.
went up to that section. It didn't go that far down Pendleton Street.
So I guess then we need to discuss whether or not.
That's
we
right.
think
We
that
would
fits
take-
with.
Yes, and we're
with the-
open to your guidance on that.
Mhm. Okay. Well, I think that's something we'll talk about when we actually address these
Sure.
issues, but I just had a question about that.
Okay.
And then I have some issues with the tree ordinance that I really want to spend more time with when I have a chance to see some comments from Trees Upstate. But there's some little things, excuse me, allergies have got me. So for example, under tree removal and replacement, and this is in section 5.2.2, B, number 5. I don't really get this. It says, in cases where tree mitigation is required, but planting is not preferred by the applicant. So what does that mean? If planting is not preferred by the applicant? I mean, I can imagine there'd be a lot of times when the applicant really wouldn't want to do any planting, so. And then it says, the administrator must approve a fee in lieu mitigation via payment to the city's tree fund. I also want to change that word must to may. But I need an example. When would we let them off the hook? And if they just didn't want to plant? I'm missing something here.
I'm going to defer to Edward Kinney on this one. He's my tree expert.
Among other things.
Okay, Edward, tell us,
Yes.
when would this, give me an example of,
Sure.
of this, and it really doesn't look like, it just, the way this reads to me is if they just decide not to plant, then the administrator has to approve a fee in lieu of mitigation and have to give money to the tree fund.
Right, so that is actually correct, and that has been the case since you passed the original tree ordinance, I believe, back in 2021. So that is not a new update with this version. This usually happens when, for instance, they clear cut an area, for instance, and they simply don't have room to replant what would be required, because in the current requirements, for every inch that you remove, you must replant. Now, they don't always have the room to do that, right? Because you've got parking lots and you've got buildings and whatnot. So in those cases where they simply don't have the room to replant what is required, then they actually do the fee in lieu of.
Well, if that's true, I mean, if that's how it works, then I think the language could be changed where it doesn't make it sound like it's just, I just don't feel like doing this. Where it's, where I'm unable to do it, I'm incapable of doing it would be, yeah, if it's not feasible, yeah, right.
So
Planting is not feasible.
we can look at that, but we also have to allow for people simply to have open yards if they choose to have so. So we still require them to have a base level of tree planting. And in the 2021 update, we actually changed that from 1 tree per 3,000 square feet to 1 tree per 2,000 square feet. So we did see a rise in the number of trees that are required to be planted by 50%. So they still have to do that base level of planting, but by saying, by allowing the may rather than the
Yeah.
must,
Don't want to do
then
that.
we still are allowing open backyards, for instance.
Yeah,
But we can certainly
Okay.
dive into that language for you.
okay. All right, another question, and it's just, I'm sure just my reading of this, I'm missing your meaning, I'm sure. But under heritage tree protection, number 5 again,
No construction, grading equipment, material storage, or any other activity is allowed within the critical root zone of a heritage tree unless the steps taken to adequately ensure the health of the tree are submitted to the planning department in writing. So when would that be okay? When would it be okay to allow grading, equipment, material storage, or any other activity within the critical root zone of a heritage tree?
Sure. So often what we find is that we try to save heritage trees as much as we can. However, we also try not to impact development overtly. And so we do have basically an understanding that says that you can destroy, for lack of a better word, you can destroy up to 33% of a critical root zone, because our arborist has chimed in on this and he has made the determination that if you take away 33% of the critical root zone of a tree, there's still a pretty high, it is favorably going to survive and still allow them to build. So we don't want to impact development too much. So when they are trying to preserve a heritage tree, we require them to put fencing around it so that you can't put construction equipment on top of it. Please understand, though, that there's nothing in our ordinance that forbids anyone from destroying or removing a tree. So this would really be at their discretion if they wanted to save that tree.
Okay. I think I'm going to pass the gavel over to Mike and come back with some more things at our next meeting.
Okay. Just for the commissioners, I did send a lot of comments over to staff, which Shannon responded to. So I'm just going to hit the high points to obtain clarification really more than anything and not get caught into the details. I do want to follow up though on Pam's question. I appreciate, Shannon, your explanation on how we're going to address revisions to this code. I thought I heard 6 months, 12 months. Is that memorialized somewhere, or are you recommending?
I'm recommending that you all make that as part of your ordinance recommendation to City Council so that it is memorialized in the ordinance. That would therefore make it a requirement.
Okay, so
it's not in the code, but it is staff's recommendation that we do that review. And the best way for us to do that is to include it in the ordinance when we get to the point where you're ready to pass that, to ensure that we have that in there.
Okay, good.
Commissioner Martinez, I would ask, are you good with the 6 months for the first year and then annually thereafter? Or do you have other ideas in terms of the timelines?
Yeah, that's a very good question because I've been noodling 6, 9, or 12. I guess my concern with 6 months, the question is that enough time? And is 9 months better? And then thereafter, it could be a year after that. A follow-up question is this perpetual, this annual review?
Yes, that's what we would be asking for, is an annual review once a year to keep the ordinance current with the community.
Yeah. You know, I'd like to hear some input from the others, but sort of, I don't know, my lean right now is probably 9 months, but I don't know for sure. Yeah.
You said 6, 12, and then 1 year.
That's right. So the first year we would review it 6 months, every six, twice the first year, because obviously that's when we first implement it. And that's when the majority of issues are gonna come up, where we immediately realize that this is not working the way we intended, or, there's gonna be some type of unintended consequence, or we don't see the affordability bonus being used. If that happens, those are the things that we anticipate would happen within the first year. But technical issues with the code, as our builders start to use it, as our residents start to use it, I think we'll know pretty quick if we have an issue. And that's why we had talked about 6 months, so that if something, is really, this is a big issue for our neighborhoods, or this is a big issue for our corridors, that we can address it in a timely fashion. And I think that that's to make sure that people have confidence that the code will be, this is not a one and done, that there's going to be a constant evolution as problems arise, that we're addressing those.
If the staff has any issues during that time of review, would you all have transparency in discussing what you all had difficulties with as well?
Yes. Yes, we would. I mean, I would tell you that, and I think I've said this before publicly, one of the text amendments that we've dealt with, that we did in 2021 that requires the neighborhood meeting prior to submittal to staff hasn't worked exactly the way that we had hoped, because the issue is that sometimes we are just seeing the project at the neighborhood meeting, or we're just now learning about things that have, that the developer wants to do at the neighborhood meeting. And then we're getting questions about it from either our community or our council, and we may not be able to answer those because we're learning about it at the same time. And so that's an example where I think we could have gone back and, we still need to have those neighborhood meetings, but look at the timeline about when those are held after some type of submittal to staff, so that we can be well-versed on the project and answer the community's questions on it. Where sometimes I feel like we're at a disadvantage because we can't, they have questions the next day. And there was a neighborhood meeting last week. We had a community member send us an email yesterday that, had 5 or 6 questions that we're still working on, trying to get the answers back to that community member. Because we're seeing some of the stuff for the first time at the neighborhood meeting, just like the neighborhoods. And so that's an example of, to answer your question, Commissioner Adams, where that would be something that staff also would have an issue with and would want to bring to y'all for consideration about how we could adjust that. That's an example of something that staff would bring at a 6-month review.
Okay, I appreciate that. So 6,
Yeah.
and then after the second 6, 12.
Annually.
Yeah, okay, very good. I want to go back to that chart that you had on ADUs. I'm assuming that, so in order to incorporate something like this, we have to do that as a motion, or is
Yes.
that going to be incorporated? Okay.
If you all like it, we would like to receive that feedback so we can bundle it, add that as part of the changes that we would bring back to you at your next meeting for consideration.
Well, I personally like it.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
That's kind of feedback we were wanting to get. Do you like it, or do we go forward with that idea, or do we abandon it?
What I would say is, as long as this is within the standard of care, it sounded like you did your research. Me personally, I'm good with it.
Is that heated square footage?
I'm sorry, what?
Is that heated square footage?
Yes.
So if someone wanted to build as Mr. Eldridge said, a grand flat or a unit above a garage, but you suggested a 1.5 story max?
That's correct. No taller than 20 feet.
So you really couldn't do a garage apartment? Because
Probably not.
you might.
It just would depend on your floor heights
Design.
and your design.
Was that your intention to not allow that?
Our intention was to respond to the neighborhood request that they not be that they would be shorter, so that they could, so that it wouldn't be overwhelming to the neighborhood and it wouldn't affect the overall character of their neighborhood. So we tried to keep it with a 16-foot wall height and a 20-foot total height. I think you could probably get close with that. And now you would have, on the sides, it would be pretty low, but I think in the middle portion, you could work with that if it's truly a garage apartment.
You want to poll us?
I would be happy to poll you. Do you want me to do roll call? No. Commissioner Soulsby?
Aye.
Did you respond?
Commissioner Adams, I mean, I
you
get
respond?
the impression, though, that overall, that y'all are liking the scale. And I'm seeing a lot of head nodding yes. So that, without objection, we will be bringing that back to you, and that will be included in the next draft.
Very good. I do have a follow-up question from a point that was brought up at the last hearing. And there was concern about, because we're adding more impervious surfaces with these ADUs, there was a point about the amount of stormwater that's going to be added to our stormwater system. How do you guys respond, or have you thought about that question?
Yes.
Just curious about your position on that.
We have, and when we get through this document, the next document that will be coming before you all will be our engineering designs and specifications manual, which is our technical document that is an appendix to this document we currently have, and that would be reviewed by Planning Commission. And as part of that, we have a lot of changes to stormwater that are for individual single-family lots that will be included within that. And that is a result of the work that our infill committee did several years ago, and our work between our consultants and Paul Dow, who is our city engineer. And so we are addressing that through the stormwater, and we feel like we can do that through the stormwater, and through the stormwater requirements. So, we're going to require, and, stormwater for, that has to be addressed for each single family lot. And so we feel like through the stormwater ordinance that we can properly address any issues that may come up, with ADUs.
Very good. I just want to acknowledge, thank you. I was the one who brought up some concerns as it related to campus development and design, and kind of locked eyes earlier. I appreciate you and the consultants adding that section, because I felt like that was a district or a zone that was not accounted for. So thank you for doing that. I wanted to talk a little bit about your thoughts behind sustainable design, because again, that was a concern of mine. I want to caution how I asked this, but it's not intended to be prescriptive at all, but I feel like since we're looking at the code, that there could be a great opportunity here to really think through buildings in the future. So I know it sounds like we've got a sustainable design in city person now.
We do.
Have you started those discussions at all?
So Ms. Hannah Slice, that's sitting there is our sustainability planner. And we've barely touched on it in terms of the design. I know that our team has a lot of ideas about how we can move into that realm. I think that our current approach is obviously Greenville 2040, our comprehensive plan, requires an update every 5 years. And believe it or not, it'll be time to start working on that update in 2024. So we will start probably mid-2024 with council's direction. I'm assuming that we'll have a steering committee, as we did last time, to update our plan. And one of the components that we're required to update now under state law is the resilience component. Whereas we did not have that previously, we now have that. And so I think that there will be more emphasis that's placed on both sustainable design and natural disaster planning because of that new element of the comprehensive plan that we will have to address in our next update. So I think that there are probably, based on some feedback that we got from our Green Ribbon Advisory Committee that really oversees our sustainability for the community, while this code has some positive directions, I think it probably, there's still some things that they too would like to see it addressed. And I think that the way we do that is through the policy updates that will be required as part of the update to the comprehensive plan.
Yeah, I felt that the commitment wasn't strong enough, but I feel like incremental steps is probably the right move to change culture and mindset. So I think that's okay. I've got one last comment. It's about the administration. And I think one of the challenges we see as a commission is the inconsistencies of the applications. I mean, you can clearly see applications that have spent a lot of time and others that have not. And I strongly encourage that really, I'm not sure what needs to happen in the process so that there's equity or equal effort put in an application, so that, people that who don't understand construction, I think would benefit in sort of consistency in what they're seeing.
I think that we need to review once we get this code adopted, hopefully when we get this code adopted, we'll have to change a lot of things through the administration, and that's going to take some time. But one of the things that we will have to change are all of our applications that you currently submit to the city. And I think where we can improve upon that requirement, Commissioner Martinez, that you're discussing, is through the requirements of the application process. Because there's minimums, and there are some who are gonna just meet the minimum, and then some that are gonna far exceed that. And I think that's why you see the differences in your applications. And I think that it's us looking at what are the minimums that need to be submitted so that the picture is clear for everyone across the board. And so an example of that would be, do we start to require, renderings, not just elevations? Because a lot of times people can understand the rendering and look at it a lot easier than maybe just trying to read elevations. And so I think that that's where we can try to see some improved consistency of what you're talking about, is through the application process.
Very good. That's all I have, Madam Chair.
All right.
I want to reiterate some of the things that were just said. I was looking over a sustainable GVL report, I think, in Furman Shi Institute, SHI Institute. Sorry. Involved in that. And I was just curious, did we talk to them about this zoning ordinance? Did we consult with them? I was also looking at Greenville 2040. And I think 2 of the 4 things that were mentioned were environment and courageousness. And I'm not sure we're being courageous enough about the environment with this new zoning ordinance. So I would also like to see if we could work on that. I also think I heard Commissioner Sosby say something about ponds. I just wanted to make sure I didn't see anything about retention ponds. We are getting rid of retention ponds, right? And is there any way to get rid of retention ponds that are now currently in the city? Phasing them out, incentives, turn them into green space. I'd certainly like to see something in regards to that. In regards to ADUs, and this is kind of going back to the stormwater thing, I was concerned, can an ADU essentially fill up the bulk of the property so that there's really not much yard left, and whether maybe a percentage of the property also needs to be considered. But it sounds like with this, I would assume that problem is going to be pretty much non-existent.
I think that's correct. There's going to be limitations in place that will be reviewed during permitting. And we don't anticipate, and nor do we intend, that every lot will be able to support an ADU in the city.
All right, yeah, so I think that concern is I'm not worried about that concern. I do think, though, the owner ought to be able to live in either unit. I think I can understand that. And I think if we try to litigate or regulate, codify family members or non-family members or whatever, I think that's can be complicated, to say the least. I noticed part of the Planning Commission duties, it used to be to approve zoning and annexation. I think that's no longer in there. If City Council doesn't want us to do that.
Zoning is, you still have to approve the zoning. It's
Okay.
just the annexation.
Just the annexation.
City Council. But the zoning of the property is still under your purview.
Okay. I think.
And that would only be, I think, for 100%.
Well, it doesn't cause me any huge heartburn or anything, but I think the annexation question, we had an issue obviously this
Right.
year.
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes we're here to help with those problems. If City Council wants to take it though, hey, that's, obviously their prerogative. So I had a question about, and I think our historical neighborhoods, for me is a concern. And some of those lots, even though they're not developed, are bigger than what is anticipated under some of these zoning classifications. So if you have a 100-foot wide lot, if you're in RHC, are you still going to be restricted to a 40-foot wide building, residence?
It would depend on there's ways to kind of mitigate that, offsets. And that's one of the things that we've talked about. We even talked about it internally for additions on existing homes. And so I think we could work within that. Now, we've also put a provision in the code that if you have an R6 or R9 or S1 lot currently, and you submit building plans within the next 12 months, that it would be under the existing code, because we know that people are in process right now of trying to finalize their building plans and not knowing when the code will be adopted. We don't want to do anything that, you know, they're working on building plans, they think they have a design, and then they come in and like, oh no, we have a new code now, that doesn't work. And so that was something that we added to try to address that specific question.
Well, it's certainly just, you know, a lot of these neighborhoods have big homes next to small homes.
Yes.
And if we're trying to fit, it's just not going to work with a cookie cutter, you know, one type approach. So now, and then, so what if your house burns down? Are you going to have to comply again with that
No.
40-foot? Okay.
There is a provision within the code, and I don't remember the exact section, but I think it's in the administrative section that we added to the March draft that specifically says that if the home is destroyed by natural disaster or fire, you can build the home back exactly as it is. Because we want to make sure that, you know, unfortunately, we do have those things occur. And we want to make sure that people can build back exactly what they had. So that provision is in the code to protect their property rights with their existing homes.
I think the only question I had left was the affordable housing component. Is it 10% or 15%?
It's both. You can do either or.
Okay. How did we come up with those numbers? I assume we need a lot more affordable housing than 10 or 15% in the city.
So the Greenville 2040 plan had a requirement of 10%. That was what was set by our Greenville 2040 plan, 10% and 80% AMI. Of course, lots changed since that plan was adopted. And obviously we've been through COVID and the pandemic, and which has resulted in a lot of inflation, price issues in the market, materials. And so, you know, we made the decision to float to you all and to City Council to up that from 10% to 15% at 80% AMI, understanding the affordable housing situation that we have in the city. And then we also added the 10%, 60% to try to get some deeper affordability, because you know, we heard a lot over the last year that 80% is not affordable. And, you know, that's not really affordable. That's workforce. We need a deeper level of affordability. And so we want to incentivize that. So, you know, that was not addressed. 60% wasn't addressed in Greenville 2040, but we're taking the chance that if we give people the option, that maybe we'll get some deeper levels of affordability. The averaging was also added to try to get a deeper level of affordability, knowing that it might result in less units, but if we can get units that are in the 40% AMI, and you know, we heard just a few weeks ago, we need to be targeting, you know, units that even at 45% AMI. Okay, so if we're trying to get 40% AMI, then you know the averaging is our attempt as staff to try to provide an option to a developer to do deeper affordability.
And so I guess still just how did we come up with that? I know Greenville 2040 came up with 10%, but do we know why 10% was the number? Do we have studies or anything that suggests that's going to be enough?
That was what the committee was comfortable with at that time, was at the 10% level. And that was widely discussed during Greenville 2040.
All right, I don't think I have anything else.
Okay. That leaves me.
Chair, I just have one thing.
go ahead,
I want to discuss the curb cut issue, but I don't want to do that tonight. And I'd like to, I know that's going to be maybe a lengthy discussion possibly. So can I just ask, can I say that I want to talk about that next time?
Well, I think if you could let us know your main concerns with the curb cuts, because if our goal tonight was to hear planning commission's concerns after you all had a chance to hear the public, and we had a chance to hear the public hearing, is to take your concerns and package them with their concerns, try to make the modifications so that the next meeting we have a public hearing on all of the modifications thus far. And so I think that in order to meet the spirit for the public hearing, knowing what your concerns are tonight would be important, or knowing them very quickly would be important for the next draft, because we want to be able to get a draft out to the public for a public hearing that then can get voted on by this body and sent to city council.
Well, basically, I just think we ought to keep it the way we originally had it.
Okay,
In keeping with the goal that Greenville has stated, that we want to be more pedestrian and bicycle friendly and safe. And I think the more curb cuts that we allow, the less safety we'll have for pedestrians and for cyclists. So that's basically my point. Don't know if we want to talk about that, but that's just where I'm coming from.
a lot of times, I do have a couple of questions if you don't mind. A lot of times what we're hearing is, that the curb cuts on state roads are gonna be decided upon by our local SCDOT office, which we work very closely with them. But at the end of the day, it really is their call on the number of curb cuts. Are you acceptable to what we discussed earlier with Commissioner Soulsby about, if it's on a state road, that we basically are deferring to the number of curb cuts to be the decision of SCDOT? Essentially it is. I don't think we have a choice.
Well, if we don't have a choice,
Now, when we take it over as a city street, if we do that, we have recently, last year we took a couple over as city streets, and it's city streets, I think we have more say on those roadways. I think where we get into trouble is when we start trying to, I think, we have to make sure that we are working with our partners and ultimately who has the decision. And if they own the roadway, I think they ultimately own that decision on the number of curb cuts.
well, I mean, it sounds like we wouldn't have any say-so anyway, so,
Well, we're always invited to the table to provide input, so I don't want to say we don't have to say so, but I think the ultimate decision is SCDOT's because they have to issue the encroachment permits for the curb cuts.
well, I guess I'm just, the fewer the better.
Got you. Understood.
I would agree with that as well.
Okay,
And what percentage of our roads in the city are SCDOT roads?
a lot.
I think that's an important.
I don't know
a lot
the
of
exact
streets-
percentage.
Yeah, and a lot of the streets that you wouldn't think, that you would think would be a city street,
Are SCDOT owned,
So-
that's correct.
Pendleton Street, Anderson Road. I mean, they're just significant, not only number of miles, but also the significant streets.
Commissioner Eldridge, I would tell you that DOT has an interest very similar to yours. They want to make the minimum, it will be the minimum number of curb cuts allowed, and they don't give them out very easily.
Madam Chair, I've got one real quick question.
Go ahead.
Shannon, I meant to ask this earlier. Through all the public outreach that you've had over the last several months, do you know what percentage of population in Greenville you touched about? I'm just curious if you had any estimate.
Well, we've met in person with over 1,200 people. And so I don't know the number in terms of people who've watched, our videos, watched online, participated online. But between Coffee with the Code, the Learning Labs, neighborhood meetings, of which we attended a significant number of neighborhood meetings, meetings with various people throughout the community, we have had at least 1,200 individuals that we've met with in person. We're also planning to do, if I can have a second for a commercial, the Learning Labs that we did several weeks ago were really well attended. Quite frankly, I was really happy and surprised a little bit at just, the people that came out and sat down with us one-on-one and went through the code and spent an hour or two. Some people spent 3 or 4 hours just listening to the conversations and learning from the conversations going through the code. So we have selected 4 more dates to do Learning Labs over the next, I think, starting next week or the week after, that we'll be putting out to our communications team this week of additional Learning Labs where people can still learn about the code because it's still a draft, it's still in process. And we want to make sure that anybody who wants to have time with us as staff or time with this code, that they have it. So you know, our communications team has done an estimate for me in terms of how many people we've touched digitally through our digital footprint, both through, you know, our city newsletter, our social media channels, and I can provide all of that to Planning Commission. But I think that while obviously we don't always meet everyone's expectations and we fall short, we've definitely worked hard to try to get this word out and be as out and about in the community as possible for the last 2.5 months.
Yeah, the reason why I was looking for a metric is I was trying to address a comment that came up at the hearing about, you know, not people knowing about it or being able to read it. So, you know, it's just a good lesson learned. I guess next time you go through this, you know.
Yeah, we try to keep in with everybody, and we know we've talked to at least 1,200 people, but in terms of how many people are watching the videos, how many, you know, that part is a little bit harder that we don't have all those metrics on. Our communications team does have all of our social media metrics, and I can provide that in the staff report for the next meeting so that you have that information.
Very good. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Yeah. Okay. I went last because you guys have touched on a lot of my things, but one of the things that I think actually Jeff spoke about a little bit was just the diversity in zoning in some of these neighborhoods. And I think we've touched on that a few times, so I won't dig down too deep into that, but just making sure that we're giving each neighborhood the opportunity to develop in a missing middle way, in a single family way, in a multifamily way, smartly. I think there's some areas that maybe, I think Jeff mentioned Greenville and Spartanburg. I just want to make sure that we're being extremely cognizant of the people who live there today and who could live there in the future, and the families that have been there for a very long time, that we're just respecting that property as we are in other areas of the city. One of my more technical notes is it would be my recommendation on the, mainly on the mixed use, MX2, anything that can hold commercial or multifamily, that we consider actually removing the prescribed height. There is a lot of different story heights, floor to floors, that can be for different products, whether it's multifamily, retail, commercial, higher education. I mean, we're doing floors that are 15-foot floor to floor in a commercial building or a higher education building, because that's literally the space requirement to get all the ductwork in between the ceiling and still have a livable height within the actual space that the people are occupying. So it would be my recommendation to obviously leave the stories, you know, 2, 3, 4 stories, but sort of put a perimeter of a range, whether it be 10 to 16 or whatever it might be. So the staff does have, and the applicants do have parameter on, you know, what those can be average.
And are you thinking that we would look at maybe starting that at the MX zones and leave alone the RH, the RNA, the RN and RC zones?
I think
or just RH and RN zones?
The RNX, I actually considered as a part of, because I believe they can have some small commercial in the RNX zone. So I think that could be a consideration just to study.
Okay.
Because if you think about, if the ground floor is, which I believe in the RNX.
You know, RNXC.
The ground story height is a minimum of 10. But if you're doing some sort of retail floor, you may want something that has a little more storefront.
Like 14 feet.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've got a lot that we would have wanted, that would possibly have 14, because we like having a little bit of height on the bottom.
Right.
Because it allows for additional transparency and activation. We're going to have commercial space. We want it to be activated.
Right. So that would be, because I think right now it's talking about the minimum story height being 10 on the RNX zonings. But, you know, if you start looking at that commercial retail floor and then you've got a prescribed height, you're going to get over that pretty fast, even just to get that storefront elevation or height. let's see. As a part of that, there's just a clarification in the code that if we continue to prescribe height, whether it be for residential or whatever, there's a graphic that kind of on a flat roof, if that height is the parapet, it actually, the graphic shows it below the parapet. So I think there's some encroachment allowances for the parapet within this. So just to make sure that that's super clear.
Got it.
Let's see. Okay, so on the use table, you guys covered a lot of my stuff, which is nice. So on the use table, just like we talked about, the religious assembly, the up to 10,000 or 10,000 plus square footages. I'm wondering if we need to consider a single line similar to that for general food and beverage, general office, general personal service. Potentially, I think there was a retail one as well, general retail. That one may be a little more specific. But just take a look at that as a whole and the designation between the.
I know that 4,000 tends to be a little odd because we sometimes end up with spaces that are that can be divided into 1,200 square foot suites. So, and then you want somebody who wants to put 3 suites together or 4. And so they couldn't get to the 4,000. So I'd like us to look at it and see if we either make it single like you're talking about, or do we need to up that bottom number from 4,000 to 6,000? I think 6,000 is a pretty standard that we see in our world. And so maybe that is, maybe that's the difference there, because I know that with a lot of salons, they're going to be about 5,000 square feet. And of course, I think we want to encourage that type of neighborhood commercial. I think restaurants right now are going to probably be close to 5,000 square feet, depending on if it's a sit down and not a QSR, quick service restaurant. There's my alphabet soup again. I think that, so I think we could look at that, Chairman Terry, and we'll look and see what our options are.
Okay. Yeah, just.
Do you think 6,000 is the right number for those when you're looking at office, retail?
Well, I think if you're looking at where they're prescribed within the use table versus the RNX versus the MX or BGH, I think it makes sense that, you could potentially have a 5,000 or 6,000 square foot restaurant sitting in an RNX or pretty easily.
We've heard that, especially from some of our developers on Lawrence Road. So we can look at that. I was thinking maybe a 6,000 might be a good cap to kind of get some of those smaller, still allow for the neighborhood feel of your personal services like the salon, but not undoing, that maybe you've already got a salon that's 5,000 square feet and they wouldn't be able to locate there in the future because it's 4,000 versus 5,000. So we'll look at that.
I just want to make sure we're not pigeonholing those particular things just because of that square footage number.
I got you.
Okay, let's see. So there was an outdoor dining question I had on the use table as well. We're allowing it in RNX-C, but not in RNX-B. Is there a reason?
Just usually with the RNX-C, it's going to be a little bit more intensity. And so that was really the only difference. We do get some complaints on outdoor dining. When it's adjacent to a neighborhood, we're trying to encourage it on the front because it does provide great activation when you have outdoor dining on the front. And we're encouraging the email, like we have a project on Haywood Road and we've been working with the developer and they're going to move the dining to the front, which is great because it activates that front of that property. And so, but when it's in the back and it's adjacent, and we do have a lot because of just the way and I talked about this at our last meeting, the way our corridors are set up in the city, where the corridor abuts directly adjacent to residential property. And when the outdoor dining is in the back, it does tend to get some complaints from the neighbors. So we can look at that. I think it was just, there's an intensity difference between an RNX-B and an RNX-C, but that's something that we can look at.
Okay. The next thing I had was just some clarity on the I can't say it, applicability table. There is, as far as an addition to the building goes in particular, I guess at what point, this talks about an addition, I'm on page 4.3. Development bonuses essentially apply, standards generally apply, is what it says, on development bonuses, and then it goes into pedestrian access, bicycle parking, all that's fairly clear. But as far as the additions to the buildings go, does that mean that if I have a 4-story building that's already existing in an MX2, and I'm adding a portion, I'm adding to that building, am I only by right allowed to do 2 stories and have to pay the affordability and open space bonuses to get to the 4? Or because I have a 4-story building already, can I build on a 4-story building by right?
Okay,
That was a big question.
so if it's a side addition, I think you would have to deal with the bonus. If you're adding, there's a project and you're adding a complete side to it, you're expanding it all the way across and up for your stories, I think you would have to apply that bonus for that addition part. If you're at 4 stories already and you have a smaller 4th story on the top of the building and you're just trying to expand that existing 4th story, I don't know that we would apply it in that situation because you're already at the 4 stories. I think when you expand the footprint and you go up, then yes. But if you're just expanding the 4th story already, that's already there, and we do have some where they've stepped in and then you're looking at maybe doing a glass enclosure or something to allow for some additional office space. I'm thinking of a project that we approved that on downtown about a year ago. I think that, I'm not sure that we would apply it in that case.
Okay, we may just want some clarity on that.
Yeah, we'll talk internally because they're either okay with what I'm saying or they're cringing with what I'm saying. And I will make sure we get that straight and clarified.
Okay. Yeah, it's just a little nebulous.
I got you. Okay.
And it's fine either way. I just want to make sure that that's abundantly clear.
Yes.
When it comes to that.
We want it to be abundantly clear when we have to administer it.
Exactly. I would also ask the same question in the vein of the change of use as well. I mean, it's not, if we have I'm being hypothetical, I mean, if we have a building that's, and say it's a current office use and we're changing it over to I don't know, medical or whatever, I'm trying to think of where that would go. What does that bonus look like? Where are you having to pay a bonus in that sense? Because you're not adding to the building, you're not.
No, I think you're right on that. I think we need to look at that, change that.
Okay.
I've consulted with him.
Glad Michael's sitting there.
Look like
He's already like, yeah, I think I see that.
it looked like he consulted with you.
All right. Thank y'all for hanging with me. I have a little, while I'm in full agreement with the incentives and the bonuses for affordability, I have a little bit of hesitation just about how that's really going to work and if people are going to stay in the city to do those things or if they're going to go across into the county. I don't think we'll know that until we actually put this into action and see what it does. I just wanted that said. It would be wonderful if the county would participate in this because then it would be more impactful.
We agree.
So that's on public record.
Who wouldn't want to be in the city of Greenville?
I know, Shannon. I had the height question on the fences as well. I think 7 or 8 feet's a little high, but that's not something.
That may seem like minute or maybe mundane portion of the code, but that's an important one because we received a lot of feedback on that from the public. And so what is the commission? I would like some direction from the commission on the height of the fences and the walls, because originally, we actually had it at 6. And then based on the feedback we got from the public, they wanted it at 7. And that came from, not just one person. And so we put it, it's currently in the code at 7 today, 6 in the first draft of the code. The second draft of the code, we went back to 7, and I'm curious as to where the commission would like us to fall on that one.
I mean, I guess my perspective of that, if I'm a homeowner and I'm having to put a fence up, or a business even having to put a fence up, if I go to 7, that's a custom fence from Lowe's.
Yeah.
And so if I'm at 6, then I can go do that myself as a homeowner or a business owner or whatever. So I think 7 or 8 is asking somebody to go hire a professional to do that work. So I think there's the line. I also don't really see personally, I mean, obviously I want everybody to weigh in on that, but you get to 6 feet. I can't stand, I mean, there's very few people that can stand at 6 feet, stand and see over a 6-foot fence. So I'm not sure what those extra foot or 2 feet are doing for you at the end of the day, but I live at a house that has a 6-foot fence and I have neighbors on either side of me. I live on a corner. 6 feet is sufficient for my life. But that could be a different story for another piece of property too.
It doesn't have to be 7 though.
Yes, it does.
Oh, it has to be 7.
Yes.
Oh, I just assumed it was up to 7.
No, it has to be 7.
I concur with Meg. I mean, there's this, building materials come at standard lengths and heights. Once you get to a certain height, it goes beyond what a homeowner can do. Max.
Is it max?
It says max.
Well, just
It says
check
min.
and if it's, yeah,
Does it say max or min?
if it says max, okay, but if it's not, I agree with everybody else. I think it should be changed or looked into. And I'm not so sure 7 isn't too much, period. I
It
don't
says, it does say max. At least there it does. Max.
You said you heard from
Okay, well, that's,
many,
I read that wrong.
many
Several
residents.
people, yeah, during the open
So what was
houses.
their reason?
Screening from their neighbors. Because especially with smaller setbacks and the houses being closer, in certain areas, it was about being able to have that extra foot was for privacy and screening from their neighbors.
Okay,
Like from the windows?
Mm-hmm.
it does say max, so I misread that.
Okay,
If I may, then I would recommend you adjust that to 7'4", because then that meets masonry or brick dimensions. 7 feet's, again, still an odd dimension.
I see what you're saying, do the max at 7'4" so you can hit.
Yeah, if they.
so
elect to
people who
use a
want to do a
brick.
masonry,
Yeah.
masonry fence or wall could, okay,
Yeah.
we'll look at that. Thank you, Commissioner.
I did have a question on some screening. We had a situation on a project where we had mechanical units. They were on the roof. They had been there for 30 years. From nowhere could you see the units. I just wonder if it would be worth, in the relief section, actually put it in administrative work or option that could take into site conditions.
I would be fine with that, because we do know that on some, especially, industrial buildings, this is where we really see it. So we have a couple of new, I think it's a good thing, some new industrial buildings that are going on right at the south side of town. And, because of the size of the building and the location of the mechanical unit being in the middle, you literally cannot see it from any direction.
Right.
Because the building is so large that the location of that kind of keep, the line of sight, you cannot see it from the line of sight. So I don't have any issue with that if the rest of the commission is in agreement. Only in those situations.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a site condition
It's a site
situation.
condition situation where you can't see it through a line of sight.
Right.
We can review that through a line of sight study.
Yes.
So, because we run into that issue quite a bit, especially when we do some of our larger, like warehouse buildings.
Mhm. And that's where, I mean, it just depends on the topography and how you approach the building. And there's just a lot of criteria that could sit around actually not having to screen it. And it's a very expensive proposition at the end of the day too, if you don't have to do it. It's, okay, that was easy one. I think this is one of my last ones. I had a question on the signage. I would like to suggest on the crown sign section, we do have some buildings in Greenville that, particularly, like Independence Corporate Park, Park 37, the Patewood project, some of the medical office. There's some buildings that are actually more in like the 20 to 30 height range. And it would be, those really aren't covered here, especially on a highway, maybe even some retail, honestly, like, along Green Ridge, that area. But if we can, and it doesn't have to be the 350, I think you could go 150 to 200 square feet on those. But I think that's just a portion of the signage code that's kind of gapped a little bit. All right, I'm getting there. And then I think Jeff mentioned, I think this is my last one. It is. Jeff mentioned the purview of the Planning Commission, and particularly in the multifamily realm. I think the code covers the architecture side of it fairly well. What I would like to have y'all consider is whether it's a preliminary site plan for comment and for application for us to review, similar to like we would a subdivision, just so we're making sure that it's just one more checkpoint along the way. Because I do think there's been some instances where there's been some comments from this committee, from you guys that have come up during those public hearings that I think have made the projects better, and made some changes.
I don't think we have any issue with that. We'll talk internally about it. I have a question though about what I was thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Could we look at setting that for a certain number of units or larger? And where I'm going with that is currently multifamily is 3 or more. So that means even a triplex where we're trying to encourage our, our missing middle housing areas where it's allowed. That just really delays that process. And one thing we do know is that the time does hurt sometimes when we're trying to do affordable housing projects. Yep. The delay can really hurt us. And so,
could it be a special, like a particular zoning classification? Like if you get out of the RN?
Yeah, we could look at zoning classification, or we could also look at more than a certain number of units.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think with our missing middle, we're looking at anywhere from 8 or under. Maybe it's 10 units, 12 units. I think something like that, where I think it's, a smaller unit count, as long as it meets all the architecture, which is covered in the code. You're right. The form keeps us making sure that it's keeping with the neighborhood, right? And where it's allowed, that it's in keeping with the neighborhood. So the by right is meant to help with, trying to keep the process simple. I think that if we could look at that for a certain number of units and above, because I think that's where people really start to, get concerned.
It's when you have site circulation.
The site circulation.
And the siting of the buildings themselves that becomes, I think that's where we've seen issues sometimes when we're looking at site plans for multifamily, is how are you circulating on the site? How are the buildings sited? Just like you would any kind of subdivision plat as well. I don't think while they are different products and different building types, I do think it's a similar scale, I guess. So yes, to me, that would be sufficient.
Something to consider.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's.
Madam Chair,
Yes, ma'am.
to your last point, should we also consider if it's more than one building? if it's over a certain number of units or more than one building?
I think that seems fair, because then you're dealing with a siting
Mhm.
issue. I don't know.
Well, we would have, well, there would be a case where you might have a zoning that would allow for 2 or 4 duplexes on site. And so that's not anything that we would be against. And so then now we've just added to that process because they're duplexes. They've chosen to do a duplex. And we put them through a process where they could, on the flip side, do a 6-unit building and not have to go through that process. I think, I'd want us to think about that.
And I would think there'd be that multiple ways that you can think through that.
Yeah. And we may change that every 6 months.
I mean, it may be that you do.
That we have to play with that one a little bit. To
Yeah,
get it right.
I mean, that's one I think might take some of that ebb and flow of
Yep.
what's working the best. Because I don't want to slow anything down, but I also want to make sure that, you know, I want to stay in the context of what we're trying to do with the code and make things about right. But I also, if we're looking at subdivisions, to me, we should be looking at large multifamily as well.
You could exclude affordability. If it's an affordable project of a certain size.
I think we might get
No, you
ourselves
gotta
into trouble.
go.
My attorney is whispering, don't do that, don't do that. I'm gonna say that.
Don't do that.
That we will have to really look at that one.
Yeah. I mean,
No, but I hear you and we'll look at it. We'll see what we've got, we'll talk with our consultants about it.
on the flip side of that, from your rebuttal presentation, I mean, generally all that is, as far as I'm concerned, and I'll let everybody kind of speak to that as well. I don't really have any issue with anything that you presented today as far as that goes. So I know you asked for some feedback on a few things.
Yes.
So do you want us to consider that and
Yeah, I'd like your feedback.
send you comment?
Yes, send us comments on that, but, I know that the stuff I presented tonight specifically with the places of worship
Yes.
were a very, a matter of sensitivity for a lot of people. And I think that, you know, they want to know the path of which we're going. And if you in general support staff's recommendation on that, I think just hearing that would probably be helpful for them this evening.
Yes, I mean, I have no problem with any of the locations Augusta Road, wherever. Yes, go ahead.
Madam Chair, yeah, I have a question. On Augusta Road Baptist Church, can I see that one more time? It was zoned for RHB, is that correct?
Yes, RHB and it's C2 and RH9 or R9 currently.
Okay.
And so it would remain, the C2 would stay as MX2, and then the R9 would go to RHB. There we go.
You can tell me all that until I look at it.
Okay. So if you look on the map, the area that's currently on the right in the smaller map that's orange would remain as purple that's on the left, or lavender that's on the left. We currently have as MX2, and we consider that a like to like, that's C2 commercial to MX2 mixed use. Then the area that's in red is that we had currently is MX2. We would propose changing to RHB to match the existing zoning and to be in line with the lots on the other side of Jones.
Okay. I didn't write down, is it MX2?
Shannon, if y'all wouldn't mind just kind of zipping through the few items that you asked for feedback on, just so we make sure.
Yep.
Commission's got those written.
Okay. Austin, we'll go back through the slideshow and make sure that we hit everything. So this is on our ADU heights and making RHB in alignment with RHC and RHD. And this came from our neighbors in the north side of town. So this was a specific request, but it seems to find us and would want your feedback if you're okay with that.
Can I ask one question real quick? Why the emphasis on the religious facility of religious building properties tonight, and of course the ADUs. What was the reason to get that up front to us?
So the ADUs was, we received a lot of feedback, especially in District 1 after the first draft of the code was released. And we started doing our neighborhood meetings, and we had they had a lot of concerns about the ADUs. And so that's something that we've been working on since January and wanting to make sure that we try to find some middle ground on that item. The places of worship, we learned about 2 weeks ago. And there was the petition that's at your chair this evening. There was a large number of people that really had concern about, in particular, the 3 churches or places of worship on Augusta. We heard a little bit about on Cleveland, but more so on Augusta. And so when we started to look at it, we wanted to look at all of the places of worship and make sure that we're trying to look at and be equitable as we look at all of them. And so we tried to look at every place of worship on that. But the area, if you look at it today, the majority of those places of worship are either a mixture of zoning districts or single family. And so just trying to keep those in line with what's around them, I think is important for the neighborhoods and trying to preserve neighborhoods. And it's something that we want to make sure that we're being responsive to. So those were 2 big issues that had a lot of public input, and we're trying to address them as best we can in accordance with the input that we've received from the community.
All right, so from our first address to the draft back in March, was that a part of what we were going to address for today? Was that on one of the line items, or was this something where we had to slide it in because of the alarming input from the public?
The ADUs we've known about since January. The Augusta has been more recent within the last couple of weeks.
So what other priorities did we have other than if the Augusta issue was never even a situation? But what else would we be addressing at this evening if that wasn't a thing?
I don't think that we would be addressing something else instead of.
Okay.
I think it just was added to the work that we've been doing over the last several weeks.
Okay.
So it was an add to, not an instead of.
Okay, so now we didn't have any other priorities, and this had set itself within over the other priorities that we had in terms of addressing issues?
No, it did not.
Okay.
Now there is another one that we haven't really talked about. Well, we talked about a little bit tonight, and you know, is one of the things we want feedback on, and that's the drive-throughs. And so we have been working a lot on the drive-throughs. QSRs. I like that. See, QSRs, quick service restaurants. We need some help with drive-throughs, but we've been working with our, you know, we've got 2 sides on that with the drive-throughs, because we have our brokerage community that wants to be able to have the drive-throughs and has seen a change in their industry to more drive-throughs, and due to COVID, there has been a shift in the industry. In fact, I think there is it was recently announced about a Zaxby's in the upstate that's not going to even have a dining area. It's just going to have a drive-through. And so we're seeing that happen more as people kind of change their habits when it comes to food and eating out during COVID. So there has been a change in the industry, and we're going to see more concepts, I think, in the future of no dining, but pickup only with our QSRs and with pharmacies. I think there's a new trend where it's the pharmacy only has a drive-through and you don't go in. I think there's been one built here in Greenville County. So not in the city, but so I think that's something that we need some guidance on. But then on the flip side of that, we've heard from people who are in our bicycle and pedestrian community who has concern about the increased curb cuts and that being an issue for safety and moving away from trying to promote alternative transportation and mobility requirements in the code. So, you know, to answer your question, so it's not an either or, this was just an addition, but that's one thing too that we need to, that it's not just ADUs and the places of worship, but you know, another area that we would like some feedback on too is the drive-throughs.
The QSR issue, that's also with Woodruff Road in terms of all of the cities, because I always forget that part. I always think of like downtown and things like that, but forget about Roper Mountain, Woodruff Road, places like that. That would still apply to that particular area too, with the.
Yes. Now, a lot of Woodruff Road has been proposed as BG, Business General, and I think, and the drive-throughs would be a permitted use, but we've been looking at use standards. And so what are the appropriate use standards for the QSRs? So is it a matter of the use or is it a matter of the use standard? And when I say that, it's the queuing spaces that we talked about earlier, the location of the drive-through window. How do you protect surrounding neighbors from things like the call box for the menu boards and the lights? People probably don't know, but Courtney that was here, y'all all know Courtney, spent a lot of time on a drive-through that we had over on Pendleton and Academy in terms of even the lumens of the lights on the menu board and trying to get a lower lumen level on that for the lighting. So those are things that we do consider when we're looking at projects. And I think that, trying to have those standards codified would help us to ensure that as you transition from the commercial into residential, that we're doing our best to make that transition workable for all.
All right, so.
Okay, so
Drive-through.
we talked about drive-throughs. We talked about, I think, so can we go back, Austin? We talked about religious assembly. We talked about the alcohol sales. And I think we just want to add clarifying language so that our restaurateurs know that they can serve alcohol. The owner occupancy requirement, I've heard loud and clear tonight that I think that Planning Commission supports that. And I think we'll leave it as we have it right now with whether they can occupy the primary or the accessory. And then we've talked about building additions in RH and RN. That's to address some of what Commissioner Enderlin brought up earlier about the 40 feet. We're trying to look at how we can allow for additions and people as they space out. Bear actually was the one that kind of brought that one to our attention. So if you're good with all of those, that's the direction we'll go on all of those. Okay, next slide. This one came from our neighbors on West Earl Street. We missed it. You can tell that one lot. So we would like to make it, it's a single family. It's used as single family. When we changed everything to the RHC, we need to include that. We talked about this one too, and allowing for the split zoning line to follow the existing like-for-like zoning. Okay, next. Here that would be MX2. It's in line with the other MX2. RNXB seemed to be kind of an odd little outlier right there. This one came to us from the property owner. It had been a commercial building. I do know that the neighborhood has been supportive of this being a duplex or triplex. And the property owner had asked for an RNXB or an RNXC, I can't remember exactly, but wanted to be able to do commercial. That, I think the neighborhood they never discussed the commercial option there. So we would be okay with an RNA to allow for, because that's in a commercial building, to allow it to be converted into a duplex or triplex. Taking it back to commercial, I think we would want to see that go through a rezoning process so they could have conversation with the neighborhood. Okay. And this is all of the religious assemblies that we talked about earlier. So unless y'all have concern with any of these, I'm just going to flip through these pretty quick. Okay, so Augusta Road Baptist, Westminster, St. Michael's, Trinity, Augusta Heights. This is a separate action, but this is just to let you know kind of where we're going with that, how we landed.
Can we do that at a regular planning commission meeting?
Yes.
Okay.
It has to go through a public process, and it has a different notification requirement. So, this one is New Hope Missionary. property owners want MX, had asked, I think, for MX5. We think that the MX2 is in keeping with the area along Church Street. There are some that may think we could have additional height through there. So if you think that we're too limited with an MX2, maybe an MX3, I mean, it's not got residential behind it, just on the other side and with the elevations and stuff. So I would be looking for guidance from y'all. Is MX2 too short? We think MX5 is too tall. Is MX3 a better way to go?
I would feel comfortable with MX3 here.
Okay. All right. This is the one that we missed during the zoning over by Verde, and we think RC2, to keep in line with everything else in BG, is on point. This is another Verde property that they asked specifically because it's up against I-85 for an MX3, which would, if they do the development bonus, could get to a 5-story building. And we do see some in this area eventually having some, hopefully some office use, maybe even a small regional headquarters would be exceptional. So we're comfortable with this, the planning commission is. Okay. Think we know what to do on ADUs, scale and owner occupancy. Got it. Okay, this one is, we've worked hard with VDI. I know they've worked diligently with the neighborhood. They have a plan that they want to implement where you see the RNXC. I think that, and they're concerned that they won't be able to get the height they need, which is between 3 and 4 stories for this area, which I know they're vetting with the neighborhood. I don't know if the commission, they had asked for an RC5 with deed restrictions that they're trying to work between the neighborhood and the development group. If we look at the changes that Commissioner Terry made tonight about the 6,000 versus 4,000, that RC might work for them. Staff was concerned that with the uses that they want, which are a restaurant and retail, that it might need to be an MX, but I think an MX is really the wrong zoning classification in here because we're seeing that on the corridors and this is internal. So, but we're open to y'all's feedback. I mean, I said it the last time, but I really commend both the neighborhood and the development team for sitting, they've been working on this for weeks and, you know, having lots of conversations and trying to, they've got a plan that they are trying to make sure that the neighborhood buys off on that they're agreeable to, and then trying to work through the zoning. And the RNXC doesn't quite work for them in terms of they need 4 stories in certain locations. That's part of it, and the uses.
So the developer is requesting for it to be, what would be their zone choice?
RC5.
Oh, okay. Ooh, okay. But the community, they want RNXC?
At first they did, but I think they're okay with the RC5 so far with deed restrictions, but I don't know. I mean, they're still working through that. We've heard from some in the community, but I think they're continuing to have open houses and work with everybody in the whole Verde neighborhood.
Would the deed restriction be for the height?
Yes.
To a 4.
And the number of units.
And the number of units.
Yep.
Okay, so they could not request for density or request for affordability for bonus?
No.
You're talking about the residents are saying that they don't want.
I don't know what
deed
the
restrictions.
residents, but the residents are in favor of the deed restrictions, as far as I know.
Okay.
But if the development team and the residents are still working through their process, how are we supposed to?
I just wanted your feedback. Do you have any other ideas? I mean, we have an RNXC here. They have a RC5. Do you have any, what are we missing? Is there something that we're missing here? Do y'all have any suggestions? We looked at an MX, but that's a little bit wider open. So,
the
I'm
developer,
trying to avoid a PD at all costs.
No, we're not doing those anymore, Shannon.
so the developer, their intentions, even before those residents were even in those houses, their intention was, overall development was to have a 5-story building, is that?
I think it was three stories, but and I may be mistaking that. When Verde was originally developed, there was a plan, but it was not, and the property was zoned S1, which is service industrial. And there was not a planned development that was put into place that codified what the town square, this is like the town square area of their development would be. And so we have the Summerall building, which has been built. We have Stella's across the way. And so what is remaining is the rest of that property between Chadsworth and Cheddington, right there behind the Summerall to be developed. And there was a plan. And then over time, they have worked to try to redo that plan. What would that plan be? And they went through a planning process the last 2 years of trying to come up with a plan that was, and then after that, there was still some feedback from the neighborhood that they weren't completely on board with that plan. Since that time, they've been trying to continually work to refine that plan to get to a plan that everybody could agree on. And so I think they're looking at 3 stories for most of the property, but in certain areas for architectural reasons and just trying to give some interest to that and to provide some additional commercial, which the neighborhood supports. They like the commercial, I think, for the most part. Not everyone. I don't want to sound as though, but you know, the majority have said they like the commercial, is that they wanted 4 stories in certain locations. And so that's really the issue with the RNXC is it comes down to the height and the stories, and in some cases, I think the uses because of the 4,000 square foot. So if we look at that and do that to 6,000 square foot, I will have to talk with BDI and see if that's still the case, but.
So one thing to consider, I mean, in all transparency, my firm did the Summerall, and I know that building's height is generally equal to a 4-story multifamily type building. Just because it is, same comment I made earlier, it's a commercial office building, so it's got, you know, the lower levels are, I think, 16 foot, 17 foot forward 4, and then it goes to 15 above that. So it's a fairly tall building. So, you know, not that there's a code or a zoning classification this sits in, but the multifamily is probably going to be shorter.
Yeah, because the roof to roof heights are shorter.
That's right.
Residential than the commercial.
Right. So if that's the intention, I don't want to get stuck on that necessarily for this, but I do think that's a consideration that the project type, the type of building they're building or planning to build with multifamily generally would be a shorter building than the current building that exists today there. So I don't know, you're talking about deed restrictions. I just don't know if there's a way to do the deed restriction under.
I have a couple of ideas, but let me talk to the team about it, because again, if I start saying these ideas as they come into my head without talking to them, then they might get mad. So, but I have some, you just said something that made me think that maybe there's something that we've missed in this.
Okay. All right. What else is our homework?
I think we had one more. We had the West End. Okay.
It's really a long Pendleton, right?
So do you want us to send you our comments?
Yeah, that would be helpful. This has been a hard one, and we want to get it right.
Mainly along, are we talking about the Academy and the Pendleton?
The whole area, the whole thing.
So you mentioned in your presentation that you had received a letter from or something from the state.
Yes, the neighborhood had a good suggestion about continuing the RNA between Perry, between Calhoun and Miminger. And we thought that was a good idea. And we proposed it, and then the state sent us a letter saying they didn't think it was a good idea. So, but I think that, eventually I would expect that property at some point in the future to possibly redevelop. And I think that we need to be mindful of that. So we're open to suggestions on that.
Isn't there an area plan?
There is, there is.
Okay,
Shannon, could you email that PowerPoint with all those to us, and then we could individually just shoot you an email back with our
Yes.
thoughts?
But the area plan is.
Then there was the Pendleton area that we talked about too, that we also want some feedback on, that over by the village.
Okay.
Coming out of the village, going back into town.
yes. Okay. All right.
And that's
so-
it. I mean, not a lot.
No, nothing. All right, so
Okay, let's talk process.
let's talk process.
Let's
So-
talk process.
So it's 7:45.
Yeah, I think y'all are getting tired
And
now.
I'm baked. I'm sure these other guys are too. So I guess, you guys are gonna work on revisions from public hearing, our comments. Is it do we close, is it a deferral?
It would be a deferral.
Okay,
And so that would allow us to have another public hearing on all of the changes that we've discussed the last two meetings. What I would like to do is, we are going to endeavor to make all of these changes and get everything ready to public notice by close of business next Monday, because we have to meet that May 2nd date.
okay.
Okay, if we can't make that for some reason, like sleeping,
Yeah, that'd be important.
then I would like a secondary date from you all.
Okay.
So that we can let the public know that if we can't, I mean, it's just, what can we physically do to get it ready between now and next Monday?
30 days from the second, right?
30 days from that. I can't read this for us. But I think it's sorry about.
Can I have 2 minutes to consult on dates as we're trying to figure out advertisements? Do you mind for a second,
Nope,
Chris?
go right ahead.
May I have you, please? Now, let's talk about our dates. We're trying to make sure we hit that we are hitting our state requirements.
Yeah.
Well, we have your snacks, Jeff, to hold them hostage. Raising them. No, but he's supposed to call. He didn't get a car for his family. They're probably in the parking lot. So, I'm trying to.
My wife's just like, we expect we're gonna.
Oh.
We'll go with that.
Oh, I know, I was gonna say, that's, say the, before you something.
Yeah, we do.
They just said, I'm like, "Gotta say pizza."
It's good. Never
I
too
think that's
late.
got a good idea.
Yeah.
There's that to get.
Just in case.
We're still conferring. Don't leave. We're still conferring.
Jeff just went to the restroom.
We're just stretching.
Yeah,
Shadow.
stretching that pizza.
Might bring all this stuff.
Like, I want to find out. I'm gonna be able to take your information and understand it better. Because I'm looking at that and I'm listening to you, I'm like, there's stuff that I can forget and some stuff is like.
Feel free to, I mean, if you can.
Right, okay.
So, happy to.
Sure. Okay.
Somebody say thank you.
Well, I just want to get this part of the language.
All right, we have our.
You have what?
Okay, so we're not gonna ask for, we're not gonna ask for a deferral, we're gonna ask for another continuance, and we can open it back up for public comment.
Yes.
Yes, so we've already got the date of May 2nd, but if we can't get everything done by Monday, then how about the date of May 9th as an alternative? No? Okay,
I'm out of town. I know that's terrible, but
are you out that whole week, Meg?
8th through the 10th.
Okay, we could do we have BZA on the 11th. Is that right, Ross?
Unless Jeff wants to run it.
What they were looking at.
Ross, hold on one second.
Okay, sorry.
Not running.
Yeah.
Go to the
Go to the
bathroom.
bathroom and see what y'all do. What
We
day?
could do after BZA at 6 PM on the 11th. Or we could do 4 PM on the 16th as our backup date, May 16th. Right now, I'm sorry, it's a Monday, whatever that.
Monday, the 15th.
15th, I'm sorry, May 15th, Monday the 15th.
Yeah, that, we've got a meeting that week, right?
Yes, so that we would do it, special meeting so people would know it.
That's
Yeah.
my birthday, that'd be great.
Happy birthday to you.
We'll have pizza.
The 15th would be
Okay, so
my
that'd be our backup.
preference.
Will be our
Does
backup.
does that work for everybody?
So, yes.
The 15th.
15th, Monday the 15th.
It's not really
That's not a
working for
city
me.
council meeting date, right? Okay.
At 4.
Your birthday can't be a holiday.
Four.
It should be a holiday.
Mhm. Okay, so our date is currently set as May 2nd. If we can get all of this wrapped up and ready to go by Monday, we have to public notice by sometime Monday.
This coming Monday?
This Monday, the 17th. Austin said by 11:59. Yes, that's right, 11:59. Or if we can't get it done, then we would post on May 1st for a May 15th date. Or actually probably. Yeah, well, but.
Okay, so first, we're gonna try for May the 2nd.
And if we don't make it.
If we don't make it,
our
it'll be May the
backup-
15th.
That's right, for the continuance. Can I do that? For the continuance, to have two possible dates for the continuance, depending on making Monday's posting?
It has to be. It has to be continued to a date and time certain, but I think that if the motion is that,
Second, we're going.
you could do both.
No.
Okay.
And then,
It's the one that does it.
you could, or hold the meeting just to adjourn.
We may have, okay, I think I would ask that you include in your continuance to vote tonight on the continuance.
Yes.
That you include both dates and times certain. so that, we have some flexibility, but we can also let the public know that it will be one of these two dates. And as soon as we know, we'll get it public noticed also.
Okay,
We've already public noticed the May 2nd date.
all right. So I need a motion for a continuance with a date certain of May the 2nd at 4 PM or May the 15th, and May the 14th,
May
right?
15th and May 15th,
And May the 15th at 4 PM.
both at the Greenville Convention Center.
Okay, can I get a motion for that, for continuance?
Can I just say so moved?
You can, I'm assuming.
If not, I will repeat what you said.
For purposes of the record, that would be ideal.
I'd like to make a motion that we set two dates for a continuance to certain dates. One, May 2nd, 4 o'clock at the Greenville Convention and Visitors, the Convention Center, and May 15th at 4 o'clock, also at the Greenville Convention Center.
Your second?
Second.
Vote by roll call?
Lynn Soulsby,
Aye.
Pam Adams,
Yes.
Jeff Randolph,
Yes.
Meg Terry,
Yes?
Diane.
Yes.
Yeah. It's late. Mike Martinez.
Yes.
And Derek Donovan.
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you. We will continue.
Thank you. And if I could, I'd just like to thank the community for sticking with us tonight. I mean, it's been a long meeting. So for everyone who stayed with us tonight, and I'd like to brag on the planning staff. It's been a lot of hours, a lot of work for the last several months, and they are all sitting right here on the front rows. Yes, and I just, I care about each and one of them very much, and they do a lot of great work for the city, and I can't take enough opportunities to brag upon them and what they have done over the last, year, but really since January, to get us to this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon.